J'essaie de vérifier sur les médias qui sont réputés ou connus dans notre pays, qui permettent de vraiment distinguer les vraies informations des fausses informations et puis faire ma propre opinion sur quelque chose de réel.
Balanci mezi svobodou slova a dezinformacema. Je to podle mě velmi těžká, velmi tenká hranice. Dle mého pořád ještě musí převažovat svoboda slova a nastavit ty mantinely ze strany těch dezinformací asi spíš jako de strany státu.
Wij voor onszelf moeten kijken van en zeker op internet, wat is waar. Niet alleen geloven van wat ik zie, van het is de juiste informatie, maar verder kijken naar, is het de juiste bron? Kloppen de bronnen? Zijn er meer mensen die erover hebben?
Credo che spazzatura e cose buone debbano andare insieme e poi starà alla persona decidere e scegliere, ma la parola controllo sull'informazione è pericolosa, secondo me è pericolosissima.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very, very, very warm welcome to Fighting Misinformation Online. It is so great to see so many of you here in the room. For you guys, I hope you've had a fantastic morning at all the various workshops. For those of you joining us online, welcome to what I really hope is going to be a thoughtful and an insightful conversation and an exploration of some of those issues that we just heard from our lovely people who are prospective voters in what is going to be a bumper year of elections worldwide, but of course in the context here in Europe. Up to 400 million Europeans are going to be voting in the European parliamentary elections in June. It is a mammoth task for democracy, and the challenges, I don't need to tell you, they are huge. Evolving technological landscape and misinformation, and that is exactly what we're hoping to have a really frank and open discussion with you here today. So welcome. My name is Kasia Madeira. I'm normally at the BBC as a journalist, but today I'm thrilled to be here with you in Brussels to guide you through these conversations with the experts, with practitioners, and also with policy makers. It's really great to be here because it's an important occasion. Up to 400 million Europeans voting. It's mind-staggering, actually. I want to also make this quite interactive. It's not just going to be us standing up here talking. I want you to get involved. So immediately, I'm going to post a question to you. And this is a question that was based on research insights from the new Google Elections Trends Hub. Now, I wonder, how many of you, when you first of all registered a little bit earlier on today, you saw some water coolers, some water bottles, big tanks that showed you various different countries, and the question that was posed to you was which European member state is the top nation searching most for European election information? And you were asked to decide by choosing one of the so waters of that member state. And quite frankly, a lot of you thought that Sweden was one of those member states that was most interactive, searching the most, according to the Google Elections Trends Hub. Guys, what do you think? Let's have some hands. Who else? Other questions? Any other countries that you think? If it wasn't Sweden, because I'm telling you right now, those of you who drank from the Sweden tanker are wrong. Any other questions? Any other countries? Let's have a show of hands. Luxembourg, yeah, to those of you who said Luxembourg. Let's, what about we had Greece up there? Any of you hands up for Greece? 2, 3, oh my goodness. Anyone for, who else did we have? We had Slovakia, any takers? Okay, Slovakia. What about Austria? Oh my God, no hands for, right, honestly, you guys, you're wrong. So basically, when it comes to this is really, really interesting because most of you chose water from Sweden, and that is, quite frankly, not the right answer. When it comes to the Google Elections Trends Hubs, they found that the countries searching out most when it comes to election information were indeed the big reveal: Luxembourg, to the one person who said Luxembourg, well done, Greece and Austria. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah, now you're thinking. So this is, I hope, going to be an interactive session with you guys. And just to prove my point, if you reach under your seats, you will find an envelope, ladies and gentlemen. Have a little look now. Have a little look for that envelope. It's not the results of the Oscars, don't you worry. In this envelope, you're going to have 3 cards, ladies and gentlemen. And on these cards, you're going to have an opportunity throughout the day to write your thoughts and your reflections, because we want to get you thinking as well. Has everybody got their 3 cards? Absolutely fantastic. Great. I don't want any envelope mistakes tonight. It is great to be here with you today. And today's event is brought to us by Google, by YouTube, by the European University Institute, and by the Kalous Gulbenkian Foundation, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to hear now from, because of course we are focusing in on the European parliamentary elections, we're going to hear from the European Commission. We are going to hear from the Vice President for Values and Transparency at the European Commission, a short video specially filmed for us today by Vera Jourova.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to participate in this event, which is very timely. The year 2024 is a super election year, globally but also in Europe. It is a crucial year for democracy. We should not be naive about the threats about foreign interference and the disinformation campaigns of the Kremlin. We see how AI can be used today to amplify disinformation, what I call disinformation on steroids. In the EU, we have built quite a good shield over the past years, but there is absolutely no place for complacency. We have adopted key pieces of legislation to make our information space healthier and safer. First, we regulate digital services with the Digital Services Act. Enforcement is ongoing. The Digital Services Act obliges platforms to assess the risks to election. Second, we have the AI Act, which addresses the risks of AI and includes transparency requirements. And finally, we have the Media Freedom Act to protect the journalists and the independence of the media. More recently, we also proposed the Defense of Democracy package with legislation to make foreign funding way more transparent in order to tackle interference. But we need much more than legislation. Next to it, we have a series of other tools in our toolbox. We have strengthened our code of practice against disinformation involving a wide range of signatories. We fund the European Digital Media Observatory. We also welcome initiatives by private sector and civil society to do more to strengthen protection. This is clearly a collective effort. Member states should be at the center of the collective effort to protect democracy. This is why I have now a series of visits in our member states, as many as possible before the European elections. This is what I call Mission 24, or also Democracy Tour. I discuss with my partners in the member states the protection of the elections in the states. I want to make sure everyone has done its most to minimize the risks. It is about European elections, but we know there are elections all the time at national and regional and local levels. In addition, I want to promote a fair campaigning pledges from political parties. We are working first with European political parties, so they, for instance, pledge not to use fake bots or likes and show some restraint. I hope this approach will be picked up also on national level. I also discuss with the media sector their role and the initiatives to protect media freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, in democracy, the most cherished currency is trust, which is now undermined. We all have to do more, public and private actors, to restore trust and protect elections. I wish you fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're hearing there from the European Commission. Our next guest is from the European Parliament, and he's very, very kindly agreed to stay on after his speech to answer your questions. So please start thinking at the moment that he addresses us about some of the questions that you want to pose to him. First of all, let me introduce you. Join me in welcoming our next guest, the Director General Communications for the European Parliament, Jean Duc.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy of being here. It's going to be quite a long day today in Brussels with the European Council, the summit starting in a couple of hours, but this is a very important conference, and you are people who can really be very, very useful in what Vice President Jourova just said in protecting democracy, because this is the real message here today from the European institutions. How do we all together try to help to protect democracy? We are only 11 weeks ahead in the European elections. You are all aware that 2024 is started to be a challenging year for democracy globally. Elections will be held in more than 70 countries. Half of the humanity, more or less, will have the right to vote. And I say more or less because in some cases those elections are not real ones. We just experienced what happened last weekend in Russia. And of course, we saw what happens when you try to oppose to this. But it's true, there will be many elections in many places. And there are two elections this year that stand out for the influence they will have on our near future, and whose results in a way or in another are going to affect us in a positive way, in a negative way, to be seen. And yeah, these two elections are the American elections, the 4th of November, and why not the European elections on the 9th of June. But we, or at least most of us, I don't know, we can only vote in the European elections. The Americans are fascinating. We know almost everything. We are able to say what are the swing states, what a caucus is, etc., etc. And we will probably be sticking to the TV screens the night of the 4th. But we can only vote for the European elections. And these elections are going to be essential, and these elections are going in some way combined with the result of the American elections, and I'm not exaggerating, will in a way or in another shape our lives for the next 5, maybe even more years. The decisions taken here in Brussels or in Strasbourg impact the daily life of Europeans, the life of more than 440 million EU citizens. This is something that most of them now realize, or now because of COVID, because of the war in Ukraine, because of Brexit. If you have a look to the Eurobarometers that the Commission and the Parliament are publishing, the next one in a couple of weeks, you will see that right now 72% of people say, yes, I know what happens in Brussels and Strasbourg. The decisions that are taken there have an impact in my life. Positive impact, negative impact. This is, of course, for them to tell us. And by the way, mostly through the elections, in this case, the European elections. And these decisions now are taken in an era in which information is accessible, but it's also easily manipulated. In an era in which, yes, it's true, certain foreign powers use the protection of minorities in Europe, or the women's rights, or the legitimate protests, or migration, or other high-profile topics to try to impose their political and ideological agenda, and this is important, to try to artificially polarize society. And we have been experienced this in several occasions in the past, in some national elections, even in very recent moments. And this is why securing our information system is, yes, of utmost urgency. Making sure that the Europeans are exposed to factual trustworthy information before potentially facing manipulated narratives is vital so they can make free and informed democratic choices. In reality, what I'm just telling you is that this is what it's called democracy, in fact. And that's why, again, it's so important to ensure the integrity of the electoral process and to defend it against disinformation, against information manipulation, and against malign influence. What is our assessment of the situation? Compared to 5 years ago, the 2019 elections, we see that the information environment has only become more challenging since the last time the EU voted. Since 2019, distrust in scientific information or on government response have been actively encouraged by some foreign actors and internal sometimes, and amplified via social media, for instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic. Massive disinformation campaigns prepared the ground and are still accompanying Russia's brutal aggression of Ukraine. We know elections and democracy are being targeted by disinformation attacks by actors that aim at discouraging citizens from voting. Couple of years ago, 2 years ago, the attacks in the EU's Capitol Hill or in Brasilia were serious wake-up calls. They show how online disinformation can translate into harm in the real world. We have not seen scenes like this in the EU, but we don't underestimate the challenge. When we look at elections in the EU member states, we find that some narratives and manipulation techniques are present in almost every election to a bigger or smaller extent. And let me put 3 concrete examples. When analyzing parliamentary elections in the EU member states, we spot common disinformation trends and narratives present almost in every election. Narratives advocating that the elections are stolen, narratives discouraging some groups from participating, or hijacking high-profile topics to create chaos and polarization. We see, for example, stories about pens with disappearing ink in several countries when voting. We see false voting instructions being spread online during the election day. We see accusations against the technicalities of the voting process, the ballot boxes, the online voting system, the voter registration system. And this is the way disinformation actors seek to undermine the legitimacy of the electoral process, to undermine the legitimacy of the results, and to make the democratic debate impossible. We see foreign actors try and attack our institutions or misrepresent EU's positions to attack others. Example, the Kremlin regularly pictures the European Parliament as an irrelevant institution. But then when members declared Russia to be a state sponsor of terrorism in 2023, immediately the Parliament faced a disinformation campaign and a big cyber attack. But this is only one side of the chain of the communicative process. We know who the emissary is, we know which messages are sending, artificially pushing to the receptors. But they do it through a very specific channel. They take advantage of some features and algorithms developed by online platforms and by search engines. And that's why big tech companies have such a huge responsibility for their spread via their channels. We know there is no silver bullet, but the good news is that there are many good practices in place, and the EU is prepared. All the mentions done by Vice President Jourova to legislation are very good examples on how we progressed these last 5 years. What the European Parliament is doing, since 2018, the EU institutions, not just the Parliament, the national governments, the civil society, fact-checkers, media, tech companies, and many others stepped up their efforts and have implemented specific elements, structural and procedures to counter and to prevent disinformation. Starting by legislation, as already mentioned, the EU has put in place key pieces of legislation that now needs to be truly enforced to tackle the challenges posed by disinformation and other threats in the online sphere. The Digital Services Act is now fully phased in. It has brought greater transparency and accountability for platforms, and it puts specific obligations on tech companies to counter disinformation related to the elections. We now count on the tech companies to do their job, to make sure these rules don't remain on a paper, but actually make a real positive impact, especially ahead of the European elections. Just as citizens go to Google to get the tips for the top 5 restaurants in Brussels, users should be able to count on them also for reliable information on how to vote. We welcome, by the way, the efforts of search engines and online platforms on the tech accord to combat deceptive use of AI in 2024 elections, which was recently signed in Munich. I also know that very good initiatives and practices are coming from Google, like the campaign ahead of the elections across the EU to teach audiences how to spot common manipulation techniques, or your efforts to surface high-quality information about elections from authoritative sources, including, by the way, the elections website put into place by the European Parliament in Google search and on YouTube. We also count on the continued cooperation of tech companies to tackle and to counteract content that directly targets elections with deceptive means as quickly as possible. At the same time, we know that regulation has its limits. And by the way, and this is important, our mission is not to be a censor or act like a kind of a ministry of truth, but to defend the freedom of speech, not the freedom of reach. On our front, cooperation is of the essence from the Communication Department of the European Parliament and, of course, most of the political groups and the members of the institution. We research jointly with other institutions and partners to understand disinformation tactics and narratives, mostly with the European External Action Service or with EU versus Disinfo. We cooperate closely with EU institutions and with the EU member states, of course. We promote stronger media literacy by raising awareness of teachers, students, influencers, visitors, civil society. In 2023, last year, we provided trainings to more than 600 teachers and organized sessions to improve the digital literacy skills of around 5,000 students from across the EU. And we also try to help to empower media by training journalists, including young journalists, and partnering up with fact-checkers. Thanks to learning from each other and thanks to collaborating with these networks, we have today a much better understanding of what the threat landscape looks like. It's worth to mention that the fight against disinformation is an important and an integral part of what the European Parliament institutional strategy for the European elections is. We also have an important role when it comes to the protection of our information space and elections from manipulation and from interference. We know that the most powerful tool against disinformation is positive, factual communication of the European Parliament's work. A combination of early detection of damaging narratives, as well as reaching audiences with timely, relevant, factual and positive information provides a more long-lasting solution than just trying to correct the record when it's too late. So in order to pre-bank disinformation narratives, our teams, our communication teams in the European Parliament have created a section on the 2024 European election website on how to secure free and fair elections. where users can find information on who's in charge of what, on how to recognize the signs of disinformation, and some tools to tackle it. Another mention may be useful, our educational toolkit for teachers with easy-to-understand interactive modules on how to fight against disinformation. So, in conclusion, it's only right that we are aware of the risks, but we also have many reasons for optimism. We have come a long way over the last couple of years with new legislation adopted, with solid networks in place, with good cooperation across different sectors of society ongoing, through concerted efforts and robust regulatory frameworks. We are working towards a future where democratic values are upheld, online and offline. We have all together an important role to play in the fight against disinformation, and we know we are not alone in our efforts to defend and to preserve the best model, the most thriving way of living we now and have today, which is democracy. So yes, the next European elections are going to be important, are even going to be essential. There are risks, there are big risks, but if we work together, if we respect legislation, if we do all those things that we know we have to do, those risks will be limited, and the night of the 9th of June, we will get the real results on what the Europeans, what the European citizens want for themselves for the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Jean-Luc, thank you so much. I know you've stressed that you're very busy and you're rushing away to the European Council meeting, but I'm going to pin you down because we have got an incredibly engaged audience. One question to one member of our audience. Who would like to pose a question, ladies and gentlemen, while we do have the Director General of Communications for the European Parliament here? I know you've been really engaged this morning because I've seen you at the sessions. Hands up, who'd like to ask a question? Yes, the lady here. If you hold the catchbox mic up to you, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for recognizing me, and thank you for being here with us today. I want to ask a very specific question because we have representatives from Google here as well. You talked about elections being trigger events for real-life violence. We saw that in the United States. We saw that in Brazil. We also seen misinformation having to trigger these violent events. Are there any measures in place in order for the platforms to inform the types of misinformation, disinformation that can trigger real-life crimes and inform law enforcement agencies around Europe? Or are there in place any measures in order to avoid having real-life consequences of disinformation?
Oh, an excellent question.
And a very broad one, by the way. Yeah, first of all, I mean, there are many examples of what has been wrong in these last years. And of course, I'm not going to mention the host, right? But I could make a mention, for example, to the last presidential elections in Finland, where suddenly in one of the platforms, I don't name, in one of the platforms, it was much, much easier to find information, products, videos about the extreme right candidate than all the others together, because this is what the algorithm produced. Okay, we could discuss a lot about why this happened, who was behind, how was it possible, but the reality is that this happened. It had no consequences because Finland is a very resilient country. Finland is a country with a long, long border with Russia, so they, let's say, they are prepared, they know, and they can immediately make the difference between what is truth, what is not, etc. But not everybody has the same level of resilience, and not everybody is so well prepared to make the difference between what is factual and what is not, or what is an opinion and what's, let's say, more than just an opinion. It's a kind of way to try to interfere in your own debate or in your own decisions. And on this, as Vice President Jourova said, and I try to repeat, first of all, legislation is essential. During several years, the idea was, okay, the platforms have to auto-regulate themselves. And it was obvious that it not really worked 100%. So now we move to a different way of tackling this issue, which is these are the rules and these are the rules to be respected. Of course, this DSA Act is in force since just a couple of months, some of the elements a couple of weeks, so it's still too early to see what the real impact is going to be. But you can see now how the European Commission is approaching all these platforms one per one with specific meetings to go through the text of this legislation, to explain to them how this legislation has to be applied and respected, to explain to them also the consequences of not respecting this. Of course, then the question is how the citizens are going to react to this. And we know that the problem with this information is that when you are closing a door in some way, someone is going to open another one. And that when you try, or when you, because this is our duty, want having platforms that are really controlling content and looking to what's happening and looking what their clients are doing, we know that some campaigns or some ways of trying to interfere in the public debate will move, for example, to messenger channels. And I'm not going to quote them. So yeah, it's a kind of continuing war or battle, if you want. We have to adapt also to technology. This is also why it was so important that a couple of days ago the European Parliament adopted the Artificial Intelligence Act, the first piece of legislation in the world which tries also to put the limits to the way this artificial intelligence is going to be used in the future. Let's see, but yeah, this is going to be quite a joint venture.
Jean-Luc, thank you so much. Excellent question. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much, and we will release you because I know you're rushing off to the European Council meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, Jean-Luc, the Director General Communications for the European Parliament. Thank you. A lot of interesting material there. I know we're going to touch upon legislation of these platforms in our next panel as well, so there's going to be a lot coming up. But Jean-Luc there touched upon artificial intelligence. No discussion these days, let's be quite frank, is complete without an update on AI. So to tell us about how Google is addressing AI, please join me in welcoming onto the stage Amanda Story, Senior Director of Trust and Safety at Google.
Hi there, good afternoon. By a show of hands, can I start with a question? How worried are you about generative AI exacerbating election and misinformation risks? If you're worried, put your hand up. Yeah, we are too. We've been preparing for these risks for a while. And what I would love to do today is to take you through a little bit of what Google is doing in this space. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of our AI heritage, so what we've been working on in AI for a while. I'm going to share with you also how we're building for safety in our own AI products. We'll talk a little bit more about the risks specifically in relation to elections, the generative AI risks, and then what we're doing about those risks. So first, Google's heritage in AI. We've been working on AI products for decades. You'll be familiar with some of these examples on screen. Google Translate, for example, exists in 130 languages around the world, powered by AI. Magic Eraser is a product integrated into Pixel devices to help you erase pieces of an image that you take. Google Lens is something you may have used for translation purposes, but also to understand and interact with images that you find in the world. And Smart Compose is something we launched in 2018 as a productivity tool within our email composition. So we've been doing AI for a really long time, but we've also been doing AI in relation to societal risks for a long time. To give you a couple of examples here, we have a piece of AI that we use to detect wildfire risk based on satellite imagery and help to preempt wildfires before they spread. We've been using AI to flag students to faculty members who might be at risk of dropping out so they can intervene and prevent those students from leaving. And in science and technology, We've been using AI in areas like AlphaFold, released by our DeepMind division, and being used now by 1.7 million researchers and scientists around the world to detect new biorenewable materials and to understand diseases. Much of this work has been guided by our AI principles. You may be familiar with the principles we launched back in 2018, and these are really about guiding the way we do this work. They're not just theoretical concepts. These have actually been used to decide what products we launch and areas that we research. And you can see principle 3 is about AI being built and tested for safety. This principle guides our work in at least 3 ways. Firstly, the safety of the models that we actually put out there. Secondly, the content they generate. And thirdly, the standards that are set for safety across the industry. So first, let's look at the safety of the models that we create. You'll see here a very simplified diagram of how we actually launch models safely. So these green lines that you see in between the prompt and the model and the output are policies and classifiers. And that's really important, making sure that what goes into the model and what comes out of the model is safe. We're also taking safety measurements before we launch. And then we're tracking user feedback, bugs, monitoring 24/7, 365 days a year to make sure we're learning from what is being created and using that to fine-tune the model. And we're also releasing models in a very cautious way. So we launch gradually, first to trusted testers in certain countries, to certain audiences, and taking particular care over launches to teens and children. But building and testing for safety isn't just about safety of our own models. It also encompasses labeling of content that our products may create. And for those who aren't familiar, this is a field called provenance. So this is all about watermarking, detectable marks attached to an AI-generated piece of content to explain where it came from. And we've been investing in watermarking technologies to support this, like SynthID. In fact, there's a booth outside if you want to go and look at SynthID and interact with the technology. It's a really good way of understanding how that watermarking approach works. And we're working to introduce this across our products and features. Building and testing for safety also can't be done in isolation. So one of the big areas of work for us has been advocating for safe practices across the ecosystem, signing up to C2PA, voluntary commitments that we've made with the White House, for example, and partnering on the Frontier Model Forum for safety and security. So that gives you a little sense of the AI foundation and heritage that we're building from. Now let's turn our attention to elections and AI. And that has equities across the 3 pillars that Annetta talked about earlier. So connecting voters to election information, protecting our platforms, and helping campaigns enhance their security. Trust and safety, my team specifically looks after the protect pillar. So let's spend just a minute understanding how TNS thinks about protect in general. You can think about trust and safety work as a funnel. It's obviously preferable if abuse never plays out on our platform, if we prevent it before it emerges. And so at the top of the funnel, we have things like safety by design. So actually, when you use Gmail, for example, 99.9% of spam never reaches your inbox in the first place. That's safety by design. We have active verification, things like verifying election advertisers before they can serve ads, and obviously ranking to elevate authoritative information. Good actors will follow the policies. So product policies is also actually a really important part of prevention. We put out our policies, we make them easy to understand, and therefore actually end up with less abusive or policy violative behavior on our platforms. But of course, if you can't prevent the bad activity, you need to be able to detect it really effectively. And that's where this second layer comes in. We have classifiers, so bits of machine learning that help us to detect violations of our policies or local laws at scale, at speed, and at high quality. And then we have flags to supplement that, from users, from governments, from priority and trusted flaggers who we work with around the world. And we either make automated or human decisions. If the classifier can definitively say that the content violates, we can take action there. If not, it can queue it up for human review by one of our 20,000 trained moderators all around the world. And finally, if we haven't prevented it, we haven't been able to detect it, that's a really important feedback loop for us. So the way we respond to that feedback loop is critical. Monitoring of incidents, monitoring of appeals, to learn what we missed further up the funnel. And finally, there'll be some things that we leave up because they don't violate our policies and they don't violate local laws. And for those areas, what still matters is the user having context about that particular piece of content to judge the quality, judge the intent themselves. And that's where media literacy and user context comes in. And finally, our reporting and our external engagement is an important part of holding ourselves accountable across this funnel approach. So Gen AI exacerbates some of the existing risks and introduces some new risks. And we're adjusting the funnel approach in that context. There are 3 Gen AI risks that we're particularly focused on. Firstly, Gen AI that seeks to deceive the public about matters of civic and public concern in an election context. Secondly, Gen AI as a force multiplier for bad actors. And I'll talk a bit about that and also about how it's a productivity tool for us in the work that Trust and Safety does. And finally, Gen AI content or tools that might interfere with the voting process itself. So think, for example, about images of long lines at a voting station that might dissuade people from going out to vote. We have policies against violative behavior, violative images, violative content that we obviously adhere to across both normal content and generative AI created content. But there are 3 ways that we're particularly enhancing what we do in this new context. The first is providing clarity to users about what is AI generated, so that transparency piece. The second is using AI as a force multiplier for ourselves as well. And finally, working together with the ecosystem to stay ahead of these risks. So let me take each of those in turn. AI-generated images are a critical vector because the risk of viral spread. An image tells 1,000 words. Last year, we launched About This Image, which is a really important user context tool to give people a fast way to check the trustworthiness of the images that they see on search. So they can get context about where that image may have appeared across the open web, including news and social media sites. Ads are also a really important vector, and we've long required political advertisers to verify before they can serve ads. But last year, we updated those policies so that all verified election ads have to disclose if their ad uses generative AI. Again, the ad won't run if it violates policies. This is about transparency of the usage of synthetic media and AI within an ad. The disclosure has to be clear and conspicuous. It must be placed where it can be noticed by the user, and it applies across images, videos, and audio content. And in our own election responses on Gemini, we announced last December that we're restricting the type of elections queries that Gemini will respond to. This is out of an abundance of caution that this is a new technology. And so for sensitive queries, we guide users to authoritative information available on Google Search. So that's about clarity for users on what's AI generated, transparency for them, and then pointing them to authoritative sources. But now let's turn to how AI can be used in trust and safety work as well. We've talked a little bit in the past about how we're using LLMs, large language models, to improve the development of classifiers. So what typically took us many months to refine and train a classifier, we can now do in a matter of days. We can take examples of abusive content, label those, tune the large language model to identify those at scale, and then deploy that to detect abuse. And the fact that that can be done in such a nuanced way and so quickly is really, really powerful to aid trust and safety work. Think, for example, about an entirely new narrative that emerges around an election and being able to tune a classifier specifically on that. Think about within hate speech, being able to tune the classifier on specific types of hate speech that might be influencing the civic discourse of an election. So these new techniques are really powerful. They're showing really important promise for trust and safety work, and we'll continue to innovate and make sure AI is a productivity tool for us as well. Finally, we've talked about the fact that ecosystem collaboration really, really matters in this space. Google is a founding member of Multiple efforts here, the Machine Learning Commons, partnership on AI. In February, we signed the Tech Accord, which is working together to share best practice on various safety issues, including around synthetic media. And we also have a really long heritage of working with researchers in this space, so the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, for example. So I hope today has given you a little bit more context on the AI safety heritage that Google is building from, the foundations we have, our focus in terms of Gen AI elections work, and then how we're designing our products, evolving our processes, and building deeper partnerships to protect elections in this new Gen AI context. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for providing us with feedback. It's through these sorts of engagements that we can challenge ourselves to continue to do this work better together. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you so much. And Amanda, thank you for also reminding everybody about the fantastic workshops that are going on this morning and also today, the demos outside, so do get involved in that. Please join me because Amanda will be joining us for our panel on election integrity, AI and the information ecosystem. And as you can see, we've got some amazing guests joining Amanda and myself. Please give a big round of applause to my next guest, Jacob Mchangma, the founder and executive director of Future of Free Speech. Please welcome. Also, we're joined by Christina Stump, who leads the work on the policy to fight disinformation at the European Commission. Welcome. And Paolo Cesarini, the program director of 2 initiatives at the European University Institute, the European Digital Media Observatory and the European Media and Information Fund. Ladies and gentlemen, my panel. We've just listened to Amanda's explanation of what Google is doing. Christina, we heard Jaume a little bit earlier on talking about that there isn't a silver bullet. I just wonder, when it comes to the European Commission and the challenges that we're all facing, especially ahead of the elections in June, what is the European Commission doing?
So as you have indeed heard from the Vice President, you have also heard from the European Parliament, certainly we did not sit idle in the past years. We have built a very strong legislative framework. I will not repeat the elements, you have heard it. We have also initiatives in place, for example, to support the fact-checkers, media literacy specialists, researchers in their fight against disinformation. And we are not yet done. Because actually, very soon we will also publish guidelines how to mitigate the systematic risks regarding electoral processes, recommending their very large online platforms, very large search engines, to take a bunch of measures to protect electors in the electoral process. And here again, it is not one silver bullet. I mean, you have already had a glimpse of it because the draft has been published. But we have here measures in place that altogether can be very powerful in fighting disinformation. And these measures are actually building, for example, on the Code of Practice on Disinformation, that is already a tested set of industry measures. Just to give you a couple of examples, what we are speaking about, we have been already discussing these elements. For example, to provide voters with official information about the electoral process, to protect users against manipulative behavior, fake accounts, bot-driven amplification, to have media literacy campaigns, for example, to pre-bank disinformation campaigns that we are expecting, that media literacy specialists are expecting, to work with fact-checkers to label fact-check content, to provide transparency of political advertising so that users can see that they are facing political advertising, to make sure that also influencers can declare that there is transparency about this effect. And last but not least, we will also recommend a bunch of measures regarding generative AI, notably to recommend platforms to better detect synthetic content, to label synthetic content, and also to put measures in place to protect, for example, against the so-called hallucinations. So indeed, we believe that all these recommended measures that will come out soon can be very powerful tools to provide voters with a better environment where they have more transparency and more information about content they are consulting.
Christina, thank you. Paolo, you, with your program director hat on, you've got these two initiatives. I wonder, when you're listening to what Christina, the kinds of initiatives that the Commission is bringing about, do any of them stand out for you? Are you hopeful that these are the solutions?
Thank you for the question. I think that we are in a much better position today compared to 2019 in terms of preparedness. I belong to this category of optimism. However, I should also recognize that the overall environment has become much more challenging. It is due to generative AI. We talk a lot about generative AI. I would not even overstate, actually, the risk of generative AI at this stage. It may become a real risk in the future, but certainly other incertitude factors into the picture. I think the geopolitical tensions that we have experienced in the last couple of years are making the implementation of these measures more difficult and more challenging. I would say there's a number of factors that, despite my basic optimism, play for a degree of prudence. And now, if you look at where we need to be particularly prudent, I think I'm very happy to see that at the systems level, in terms of interventions at system level, there is a much stronger regulatory framework, much more detailed, much more focused on specific measures and actions, which is a good thing. That includes also safeguards for the media sector. Let's not forget that without professional and trustworthy journalism, I think whatever we do to tackle the negative sides of the information space are doomed to fail, because at the end of the day, what we need is to establish trust in professional journalism. So there are also elements in the new framework that push in that direction, positive push in that direction. I've heard with interest and pleasure to see that from the side of the platforms, there is a level of preparedness that is higher today than in the past. Looking at the integrity of the services, the cyber security. And one point, and then I conclude because I'd like to come back on other points later on. There are 2 points that I would like to insist on. It's the issue about collaborations. It's a word that has come out several times. And collaborations, meaning involvements, partnerships with fact-checkers, researchers, media literacy practitioners. Is there where I see that there is still some work to do. And there are 2 points that particularly. One is funding. And the second one is sharing of data, to have a truly open access and understanding of what the threat actually is about, to measure the threat, and what works or doesn't work in terms of mitigation measures. In terms of funding, I would say that Google is leading by the example, not because I'm kind of being involved in this new experiment, which is EMIF, but just because I truly believe that in order to preserve the credibility and the trustworthiness of these actors that, after all, need to build their own impact on trust, as we have heard several times today, it is important that funding models are designed in a manner that preserve their autonomy, their independence, and really dispel any perceived conflict of interest towards the funding. So intermediate vehicles like EMIF are really, truly useful to preserve that type of credibility for actors that are essential. It's a collective effort. Vice President Jourova was saying it's a collective effort. It is a collective effort.
A collective effort, and you were talking about collaboration, and it's nice that we're hearing a little bit of optimism there as well. But I just wonder, Jacob, Paolo was talking about how funding is important, collaboration. If these big platforms are then working to kind of ensure that there is truth and transparency, what impact does that have on freedom of speech? We know that Jean-Duc was talking about he doesn't want a ministry of truth, but are we on the brink of that?
I think it's too early to really judge the efforts under the DSA. Obviously, enforcement, what that will look like. But I think there are, at the global level, there's a danger that the narrative surrounding disinformation will lead to alarmism and panic, where the cure can sometimes be worse than the disease. So, for instance, we heard Vice President Jourova today, but she at one point said that AI-generated disinformation is like an atomic bomb that can change voter preferences. We heard the World Economic Forum label AI as the greatest short-term threat against humanity. And I fear that rhetoric focuses too much on the harms, creates a sense of alarm and panic that can fuel illiberal policies that might restrict free expression. And I think the most important element of free expression in this specific setting is the access to information. So we have a lot of fact checkers and people from the media. All of them depend on access to information. And if you start limiting that, even with the best of intentions, that might actually undermine some of the efforts by civil society to fight disinformation. I think it's instructive to go back to the period before the previous elections. So there were also great worries about what would happen. So the former president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, said that in our online world, the risk of interference and manipulation has never been so high. What happened was that it was the highest voter turnout in 20 years, and the Commission actually concluded that there had been no successful campaign to undermine these elections. And I think we've seen studies from the Atlantic Council, Oxford Internet Institute, various others saying that on Twitter, on Facebook, there was certainly lots of disinformation, but it received relatively little traction. And so but
the landscape's changing now, though.
The landscape is changing, but we have to remember 2018 was when Jean-Claude Juncker made this. This was after 2016, when we had a huge debate about fake news and so on after Brexit and the US election. And I also think that it's really important to see this in a global. So the European Union is the largest bloc of democracies, but around the world, since 2016, more than 90 laws around the world have been adopted to restrict false information. You've seen a huge increase in the number of journalists that have been imprisoned on the basis of that. And so I think that democracies have an obligation to really not try to, even out of the best of intentions, to adopt rules that can be abused by authoritarian states, and therefore to err on the side of free speech and access to information. And I think we talk about 2024 as being a super election year. I think the most vulnerable state in the world when it comes to democracy in the world is Taiwan. No country likely faces more disinformation interference, and a country without the same security guarantees that most EU member states have. But Taiwan has adopted an organic bottom-up approach that has sort of scaled back government intervention, and you saw the DPP winning an unprecedented third-term presidential election, which I don't think was what Xi Jinping wanted. So I think there's a lot of inspiration to take from the Taiwanese model of fighting disinformation.
Okay, so let's put that back to the Commission. Is that a grassroots model? Because that's not quite what you're talking about with the DSA, with the Digital Services Act.
Indeed, we are sitting here in Brussels, and the freedom of speech is certainly a key value for the European Commission. It is a key European value. And if you look at the Digital Services Act, or, for example, if you look at the draft election guidelines, you will see that the measures there are certainly not targeting removal or any kind of censorship. The measures that I have also given as an example are aiming for transparency, aiming for more critical thinking, media literacy, to use independent fact checkers, to provide more information about users, or, for example, to protect against coordinated manipulative behavior from external or internal players. So these are all elements that are fully in line with the freedom of speech and aim transparency. Also, when we are speaking about generative AI, the measures, for example, in the draft guidelines, are aiming transparency, that users can know that, yes, this deepfake is generated by generative AI. This picture has not been taken at an event, but it's generative AI. So as long as users know that this is such a picture, it is totally fine. At the same time, it can be indeed a risk if users cannot know what type of information they are facing.
So in that case, Amanda, how you touched upon how the initiatives, the support that Google is offering, when it comes to ensuring that people have that media literacy, that they genuinely know. Just talk us through the work, the partnerships that you're doing.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that we can do through collaboration with fact checkers, with researchers, with civil society, and then obviously with users themselves. So we have some of the user context tools that I referenced, things like about this image, about this ad, about this result on search, that allow users to go in and find out more information about the heritage of the piece of content they're consuming and assess the quality of that. That's something we can do on our own. But when we're working with others, it's about making sure we're training journalists, for example, on threats to them. It's making sure that we're working with researchers to look at emerging threats. And then it's looking at things like pre-bunking research. So our Jigsaw research arm did some really interesting work in Central and Eastern Europe last year, assessing whether you can actually inoculate people against potential misinformation narratives, which is a really interesting, quite novel form of media literacy, and actually discovered that you can, in certain ways, not always work, but actually prevent people from being lured by those narratives. And we ran campaigns across Central and Eastern Europe using some of what we learned from that research to try to improve people's health, their information health, their ability to detect and not be persuaded by misinformation. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can collaborate. I touched also on some of the technical collaborations we're doing around things like watermarking. But I completely agree with what others have said, that collaboration really is the key here. No one entity can do this on their own.
So we've got the platforms and obviously the government organisations. Paolo, the non-governmental organisations, how do you ensure that they have the resilience within them to withstand the bombardment of misinformation that they're getting?
Well, I think the NGOs, researchers, and I would also cut larger. I would also include media and this cottage industry, which is the fact-checking industry. All these actors together needs to be encompasses in these collaborations. They are all different perspectives and something to an added value. The question is that if, what I said before, we are in a better position today compared to the past regarding intervention at the system level. I'm less optimistic if one look today at the intervention at the individual levels. Both pre-banking and debunking, let's face it, they have some shortcomings, both of them, both the approaches. And it's very difficult to compare the other one against the other because there have been studies, but they are not conclusive. It's really like comparing pear and apples, and they are not case studies that appropriately define the advantages and the disadvantages relative to the other approach. So I would say at this point in time, the best is to proceed by using both the instruments in parallel. Yeah. And now, both the instruments, if you look at debunking, the work of the fact checkers today has some problems, both at the level of the detection, of the selection of the claim that they have to debunk at that moment of the work cycle of there, and that is very much dependent on difficult use that the APIs that are provided by the platforms that we present today. CrowdTangle is going to close down. The successor is not obviously an option because it requires improvements and also training for journalists and fact checkers. Just to give an example. And when it comes to effect of debunking, we don't know that there may be backlashes. And what is important is more and more comes clear from the recent studies that it is the delegitimation of the sources that create this information, more than the debunking of single piece-by-piece narratives that makes the difference. But to understand the life cycle of the disinformation narratives and to go back to what has originated a certain narrative, who is behind, that is the question that everybody asks at the individual level, who is behind? That level of research is still, that level of inquiry, investigation is really rudimentary, and we need to step forward. Debunking, as I heard this morning, there was a very interesting approach. Google has actually, with Jigsaw, systematized the approach in a very interesting manner. But let's remember also that by creating this level of awareness regarding technical manipulations, people can become distrustful towards any type of information. So to kind of reject instead of refute, at the end of the day, the information as such, whatever is the source. So there are tools to be handled with care. There is a lot of research that needs to be carried out, and there is where my concern lies. We lack real life, longitudinal studies that goes beyond cognitive psychology. We need to have behavioral studies to better understand what works in practice and whether the change in behavior is lasting enough. You have a real-life laboratory in your hands. Platforms have this real-life laboratory, and there is a unique position. I think when, collaborations should really focus on these areas where there are knowledge gaps.
But you talk about this idea that you end up starting refuting information. I guess that goes back to what Jacob was saying, that the cure is worse than the disease itself. So just where is the responsibility? How do you ensure that that doesn't indeed happen?
Well, I think, first of all, it's interesting for someone who comes from a free speech perspective to be part of a fact-checking or a misinformation conference where a lot of people are engaged in fact-checking, and we talk about disinformation and misinformation as if these are sort of clear-cut categories. Of course, it's very often very difficult to establish what is disinformation and misinformation, which is also one of the reasons why in most democracies, disinformation as such is not illegal. It has to be qualified disinformation typically to be illegal, and this of course poses big challenges. And so we've done studies, for instance, where we've looked at the content on hate speech that is being removed by major platforms and their content policies, including YouTube. What we generally see is that the vast majority of content that is being removed is legal content. So if you take that, if we, and I'm just speculating here, but if that is also going to be, the case when it comes to mis and disinformation, then you risk that, because of the political pressure, the pressure to really do something, to be seen as fighting disinformation, you risk that the platforms will harvest a lot of information that may not be misinformation or disinformation, that might be opinions that might be controversial, but that it could be perfectly legitimate. So that's another.
So you're willing for that kind of harmful content, possibly for the sake of freedom of speech?
Well, this is another. I think there's another question that we need to ask here. Is it safer? Are democracies safer if we say that most dis and misinformation is removed? It's not visible to citizens. Are we safer from that perspective? For instance, pre-bunking would presumably require that we at least be confronted with some degree of it. I'm not sure, for instance, that we're safe. Am I safer not being able to access Russian state-sponsored information if I want to know what's going on in an authoritarian state? I personally want to be able to see what's going on in what is being allowed, what are the narratives that are being pushed out by the Kremlin. I don't think that I'm being safer by being shielded by it, by YouTube removing such videos. So there's a delicate balance there.
Very delicate. And guys, I do want some of your feedback a little bit later on after this session, but Christina, you've got to come back in on that.
Indeed, I need to come in because indeed, let me also just stress that obviously disinformation is not illegal as such in the EU. And again, if you look at the code of practice measures or anywhere else, the query does not consist in removal of content. There is a specific case of indeed sanctions in the context of a war. And here we are not in a regulatory framework. Here we are in a framework of sanctions that are limited to the context of a war, where hybrid warfare is used and state-backed war propaganda is part of the war. So here, that's why the European Commission decided to take targeted measures against Russian TV channels who are part of this war propaganda machine. On the other hand, when we are in this regulatory framework and all the other initiatives, here we are not speaking about removal. Again, we are speaking about giving more context, to use independent fact-checkers who have very solid methods to verify content. Again, I think it's very important to call out. Often I hear, yes, fact-checking is a judgment call. No, it's not a judgment call. It is based on very strong methods of independence, of satellite images. You will hear more about that, I think, later today from the fact-checkers. So here I think we have a very solid methodology. And actually, users are worried. If you look at the latest Eurobarometer that has been published a couple of months ago, EU citizens have unilaterally said that one of the major threat that they are seeing for democracy is disinformation. And they want us to take more measures about that, again, fully in line with the freedom of speech. So we can see that in the current environment, users are worried. And they want to be part of an environment where they can also make their choices for democracy, free from manipulation and from influence where they may not be aware of what type of content they are exposed to.
I don't want to be too negative on this. Please do. It's great to get your reaction, but it is concerning that you're talking about users being concerned. But I just want to throw that point that you made about fact-checking, and we will be hearing from esteemed fact-checkers a little bit later on. But Jacob, just this idea that fact-checking is not a judgment call. Where does that fit into your concept of freedom of speech?
No, of course, fact-checking, I think, is absolutely essential. But how do you, let's say, Israel-Palestine, an incident happens, you got footage of a hospital being attacked, and so there's fog of war. How do you determine what's right and wrong? There are many things that are difficult to fact check. You might not have all the available information needed to determine conclusively what is right or wrong, and sometimes it may take a very long time to do so. So that's why I'm saying, there are things that are relatively easy to fact check, but there are certainly other things that are not easy to fact check.
Before I come to you, Christina, Amanda, do respond to that.
I think this is exactly the right conversation to be having, because I think that this comes down to where do you draw the line. As you rightly said, a lot of this is not illegal content. Our policies are going above and beyond local law and taking down things that are harmful. And we're using multiple dimensions to assess that. So, for example, misinformation about mermaids existing, not harmful. Not great, but not harmful. Misinformation that might lead to real-world incidents, harmful. We're also taking into account what we call the EDSA exception, so things that are for educational, documentary, scientific, or artistic purposes. So to your point, if you were researching Russian disinformation, being able to find that in a clearly delineated educational context actually might be an acceptable, non-harmful use case. And then we're taking into account other information. So we're taking into account, for example, how are others in the research field looking at a particular space and determining the level of harm. And I think that question of where do you draw the line of those policies is something that we wrestle with every day. There's no right answer. Our lives would actually be a hell of a lot easier if there was a definitive list somewhere of all good and bad actors and all incorrect and correct information. Where we've tried to lean is in areas where there is a clear authoritative source and clear consensus around the facts, things like around COVID vaccines or around climate change. We lean on those authoritative sources to make policy decisions. But sadly, there aren't those sources in all spaces. And so this is actually the sort of nub of the problem.
Yeah, it's not black and white. Christina, I know you wanted to come in on.
Indeed, because we agree on one point. Fact-checking is difficult work, and that's why, and it has to be done according to high standards, and that's why it is actually very good that in Europe we have very high standards in place, notably by the European Fact-checking Standards Network that have very strong professional standards to make sure that what they are putting on the table is solid, that there is transparency about their financing. So of course, when we are dealing with this domain, it is important that players are on the table who have indeed a very strong professional integrity to do this very important work.
And that it's transparent, the funding is transparent. I know, Paola, you touched upon the funding. I just guess the responsibility then to open it up as well, so it's not just journalists. How do you ensure that members of the public are fact-checking as well?
What I wanted to say, listening to this interesting conversation, makes me think of the introductory video. One of the persons in the introductory video was saying, but what I want to see, it is everything. True information and trash. I would be worried if there is a control on the information that I get. And I think that should be the starting point. The question here is how to make the information space more intelligible for the audiences. Making more intelligible, it means, I think, to work more and more on measures that increase the awareness of the recipient of the information without telling the recipient of the information whether that information is good or bad. So the fact checkers they have to be a high standards, and hopefully we have made a lot of progress there, honestly. But the real role of the fact checkers is to provide context and to enable the platforms to display that information as element of context, not as element of truth.
But I just wanted the responsibility where it lies upon, because you're talking about ensuring that is it the platforms, is it the individual? If people want to see the truth, they want to see trash, they want to see everything.
If you look at food, in the food sector, the responsibility is on the side of the producers and on the side of the distributors. In both levels of the supply chain need to take their own part of responsibility. Those who produce bad food need to be sanctioned because they do not fulfill the rules that apply for that particular products. And the distributors need also to comply with certain standards. And I think what the Code of Practice on this information has done, it is to trace a certain pathway for good practices that ensure that the distributors are actually complying with their own responsibilities. They're filling up.
Yeah, Christina, I assume you agree.
And indeed, I mean, based on your question, where is the responsibility? So our approach is basically a risk-based approach, because very online platforms are operating services that by their nature, having risks for electoral processes, for civic discourse, they have to put mitigating measures in place. And that is what I was speaking about. At the same time, speaking about wanting to see trash and disinformation, I always say the day when I wake up and I see absolutely no disinformation on online platforms, I will be worried. Because then we have overdone. But so far, I must say that this is unfortunately not the case.
It's not the case. Jacob, this analogy with information and the codes that align, say, food production, is that fair?
Again,
it's food for thoughts, you know.
So
you're stealing my lines.
If you produce, say, a medical product or food, and you put something in it that you know for sure increases the chance of cancer, I think that's a more clear-cut case again than when it comes to disinformation and especially misinformation, where the lines are much more blurry.
I want to then to think about the areas that you're going, the success of this, whether it is success, how do you measure it, what do you expect? I mean, Christina, you've already touched upon that there is a lot of disinformation out there, but I think from Google's point of view, how do you quantify that you are going in the right direction? Can you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we think about measurement in terms of activity metrics and outcome metrics. On the activity side, you can look at how many policies you have, how many takedowns you've made, and you can provide transparency around that. So we produce the biannual Code of Practice on Disinformation Transparency Report. If you haven't read it, it's 220 pages. The most recent one is just coming out now. And it provides a lot of information about activities across different platforms within Google of takedowns that we've made, new policies that we've launched. We're also providing some of that activity data in near real time to the European Commission under the DSA. So we have the Statement of Reasons database, which is literally every takedown we do across our VLOP and VLOS platforms. That is sent to the European Commission, and there's a dashboard to go and look at that data. And researchers can ask for activity data as well via some of the provisions of the DSA. So there's a lot going on in the activity space. Internally, just to mention one other thing, we're looking absolutely daily at precision and recall of each of our classifiers. How good are they actually at precisely identifying content that violates that policy, and are they catching all of the content that violates that policy? So that's the precision and recall measures that we're looking at. On the outcome side, that's a really interesting space, and I think there's a lot of research going on in this sphere and more needed to actually assess, how do you know that you've been successful? Is it, is seeing nothing a good thing? And what we have is what we call uncaught badness metrics, or YouTube has a violative view rate. And that is essentially a sampling method. So you take a sample of all of the content that appears on the platform that hasn't been taken down, that's why it's there, and you rerun it through the system to see if you potentially missed anything. And by doing that, you can then look at how many did you miss and track progress on that uncaught badness over time. And that's a really critical way of us measuring our risk, measuring that we're balancing risks effectively and not over-moderating, which is a genuine concern. And then we can look at those measures to assess how well we're doing in that regard. When you look at something like violative view rate on the YouTube side, it's actually really impressive to see how those numbers have come down over time and how many videos are being caught before they even reach sort of 10 views. So it's not just the amount that we're catching, but how quickly we're catching it that really matters.
So that's quite a tangible measurement. In terms of the expectations, Christina, for the Commission as to what you would like to see eventually, can you speak to that?
Look, indeed, we will be. We are ahead of the elections. We will very soon publish the guidelines with our expectations, the recommended measures, and of course we will watch very carefully how platforms are complying. Indeed, we have a lot of information from the Code of Practice reports. There will be also structural indicators looking into this. I would not say that there is one silver bullet for the moment to give one measurement. This will capture it, but I think we have a lot of information at our disposal to see how successful the exercise will be.
So in that case, Jacob, from your point of view then, what would look successful? I just wonder, if you're balancing proper freedom of speech rather than freedom of reach, as we heard earlier on, what would be successful for you?
I think the freedom of speech versus freedom of reach has become a meme, and I don't think it's particularly well thought out, depending on what people mean by it. Because if you say, well, you can say anything, but we'll make sure that no one gets your message, then what's the difference between freedom of speech and freedom of reach? I think one of the very unsatisfying, conclusions of this is that there is no, I think, in my opinion at least, there is no perfect equilibrium. We talk about that this is a fight where we have to overcome it, but I don't think that there's ever been a time in human history, I don't think there ever will be one, where there hasn't been disinformation, where truth has been contested, and where there have been different types of institutions that wanted to control narratives and some who wanted to challenge narratives. So I don't think there's any perfect equilibrium. And just to come back to you said this about increasingly in enforcement reports, you can see what is preemptively identified by AI and then removed. And that, if you have the perfect metrics and you could identify a content perfectly that falls within it, then that's impressive. But it's also super dangerous in many ways, because if you have too broad definitions, that means that you basically have sort of an automated form of pre-publication censorship that goes back to the bad old days. And I think that is especially dangerous in countries, like I mentioned, India is a good example of a democracy which is really, really pushing hard with very, very broad definitions of disinformation, for instance, that are clearly politicized in a way to protect the sitting government. And if India is able to push Google and others into preemptively removing content from from social media platforms that should be ways where civil society can actually air opinions that might not otherwise be aired, then what you deem as success can be very dangerous in more illiberal states.
I never want to end on dissatisfaction. So, Paolo, as the eternal optimist, I'm just going to come to you then. How do you, to Jacob's point, how do you, one person's success is one person's, mistruth, or however you want to phrase it, how do you make sure that there is enough media literacy? Because you're two initiatives, one organisation, but, how do you compensate for that?
I referred to funding before, and I think what the media literacy community needs the most is to go beyond the situation of the fragmentation on which they operate. They need to have a better possibility to assess the effectiveness of their measures, and for that they need to be supported by research. They need a better partnerships with the platforms in order to carry out initiatives that reach much wider audience and of different ages and social groups. Well, they need many things, and if these conditions are fulfilled, then I would say we could reassess the effectiveness of the media literacy campaigns. But I think at the end of the day, what we want to know is whether we are able to tackle the phenomenon or not. The World Economic Forum this year has put the misinformation and disinformation number one. We saw the slide before. Looking forward, I think it was number 5, right, in the slide that was projected before, number 5. I don't know which basis this type of ranking has been made. I think we would start succeeding in tempering, taming the phenomenon if you would have structural indicators, and as Christina mentioned before, that are sufficiently robust and based on clear data that prove that actually this phenomenon has gone down the ranking of the major risks that the world is facing. But we need an approach that is robust and solid and data-driven, evidence-based.
Always data-driven, isn't it? Listen, this has been getting a lot of, I can hear the murmuring in the room. So what I want you guys to do is just have a little chat amongst yourselves about some of the big topics that we've been talking about. I'm going to show, remember the cards that I was talking about a little bit earlier on? If you could just give us a few thoughts, get your red card out, write a few thoughts. At the end of the day, we'll collect them. And then if you've got any thoughts that you want to share after having a quick chat, you'll have about 45 seconds, and I'm quite good on timing. So then if you'd like to share some of those thoughts with our panel, then we look forward to hearing them. But just please do have a conversation, because today is about actually coming up with solutions. You've got 45 seconds for a quick chat. Thank you very much for, and I think hopefully, and then, but thank you. Sorry to keep putting you, Jacob, on the spot. That was good. Yeah.
And your provocation is
we've been hearing so much. We had a very heated exchange a little bit earlier on. We are, of course, talking about all of this in the context of the up-and-coming European parliamentary elections. So on that note, we're going to hear from somebody directly involved in them. We have a special address from the first Vice President of the European Parliament, a video filmed for us especially for today by Ottmar Karas.
Dear participants of the Google Summit, these elections define the priorities and majorities for the next 5 years. Now, more than ever, it is crucial to stand up for our rules and values. The achievements of one generation can be lost by the next. We must defend and regain them every day. In this context, we need a defensive democracy. We must be well prepared to face the fact that anti-democratic actors want to manipulate the public debate. They polarize, divide, and demotivate the society. They strive to make it difficult for voters and candidates to meet in a genuine democratic debate. Disinformation, misinformation, and foreign interference play a major role in this. Just think of Putin's Russia, which is trying to destroy European liberal democracy. Or look to the elections in Slovakia last year, where deep fake videos were spread. We experience every day how disinformation is used against objective and factual debates. The topics most under threat range from the support for Ukraine to the legitimacy of elections, asylum and migration, the Green Deal and gender equality. We can only tackle this challenge through more cooperation. Cooperation between the member states, the EU institutions, authorities and agencies, civil society and educational institutions, conventional and social media. We need a whole of society approach, including the private sector. Therefore, I am pleased that the European Parliament and partners, such as Google and other major platforms, collaborate in this fight. The exchange of expertise and streamlining cooperation are vital for a healthy environment for public debate. The code of practice against disinformation and the more recent tech accord to combat deceptive use of AI are important steps forward. However, voluntary agreements are not enough when we consider a recent departure from the agreements. There must be even stronger commitments to prevent attacks on liberal democracy. At the same time, we need a robust legal framework. The Digital Service Act, the AI Act, the Media Freedom Act, and regulations on political advertising must now be implemented and enforced. I also welcome that the services of the European Parliament conduct joint research to improve our understanding of disinformation tactics and narratives, promote stronger media literacy, empower the media through training, collaborate with fact-checkers, and support media pluralism and freedom. We are making progress and taking steps in the right direction. But there is still a lot of work to be done. In this spirit, I wish you a constructive and engaging discussion on increasing our efforts against disinformation, promoting the public debate and safeguarding liberal democracy.
and gentlemen, Othmar Karas there from the European Parliament. We've been hearing so much about the challenges, haven't we? And we've heard a little bit about the solutions. We're now going to drill down a little bit more into the toolkits that Google has at its disposal and the solutions that they are offering. Now, we are going to be putting the Google team rather on the spotlight here. This is our opportunity to ask them questions. You'll recall when you registered before joining this session that you were asked, frankly, what kind of topics are you interested in? And those topics, the main topics that came back were, what is Google doing to keep the elections safe? What tools will Google provide to empower users? And what tools do they provide for campaigns and for journalists during the campaign season? Well, this is our opportunity to get some of those questions that you put forward answered. This is Google's attempts to get down to the bottom of it and answer your questions with their subject matter experts. So I am going to be joined by an esteemed cast from the Google subject matter experts team. Join me in welcoming Sissi Messick, who works in the civics products faculty, Claire Falquier-Gagné, who works in civics partnerships, Dixie O'Donnell, election integrity, Milan Zubitek, media literacy, Vincent Ryan, news partnerships. Guys, where are you? Don't leave me hanging.
Hi, I'm Cece, and I lead product development for our election features globally across Google Search. So as we talked about earlier today, 2024 is a big election year, or as Time Magazine puts it, 2024 is the election year, with half of the world's population going through a major national election this year, including major democracies such as the EU, US, and India. The impact of these elections will prove consequential for years to come, which makes the topic of this summit, Fighting Misinformation Online, a critical mission for all of us. Here at Google, we anticipate a very high level of interest in the upcoming EU elections. According to the recent Eurobarometer report, 68% of EU citizens said that if the elections were held next week, they would be very likely to vote. So we'll see how many of them actually show up in June. Similarly, in a Google user research survey, we also heard that roughly 2/3 of EU citizens are very likely or somewhat likely to look up the election results in 2024. So this pattern of interest is nothing new. We saw this in the 2019 elections as well, where there was an 8% increase in the voter turnout and the highest percentage of EU citizens believing that their voice counts in the EU. So given this historical and current user interest in the EU elections, where are users turning to for their election information? So we have seen that users across the world have been coming to Google Search for election information. For example, in 2022, which was kind of the last big election year we had, election results was the #3 trending topic in news globally across Google Search. And if you remember, there were many elections that year. Notably in EU, there were elections in France, in Italy, and in Sweden. And across the globe, including Brazil, US, and India, election results is even the #1 search query, or even the #2 top queries, which is pretty notable because if you remember, that was when the World Cup happened. Sorry, France. And there are also, in addition to the EU elections, as Jean-Luc mentioned earlier, we're anticipating that there will be a lot of interest in the US presidential elections this year. And in a recent Bipartisan Policy Center report, 44% of US adults have said that they will be coming to Google for election information and news. So given that users are trusting Google, with the election information. One of the critical ways that we are fighting misinformation online is to make important election information, especially around voting and around election results, from authoritative sources, very easy to find on Google search. So when users first come to Google and they type in questions like, how do I vote? Or when a Gen Z voter types in like, am I old enough to vote? Or if they're looking at questions such as, what are the actual results of the EU elections? Google search will show an easily digestible experience and with voting information and election results, where users can get the answers to their questions at one glance. And as Annette mentioned earlier, all of our product features follow our principles of being authoritative, nonpartisan, accurate, and timely. And beyond the delightful user experience, we also design features with trust at the center. And what this means is that, for example, Google Search is partnering very, very closely with the European Parliament and DPA, which is a leading German press agency, as a source of our data. And we attribute to them very prominently as well, so that users know that the data is credible. Google also protects all of our election features with very robust algorithmic and policy protections to ensure that we're always showing the most accurate election data. I'm excited to pass the mic over to Claire, who leads our European partnerships, to give you a peek behind the curtain on how exactly we are partnering with the EU Parliament and DPA to bring some of these features to life. Thank you.
Thank you, Cici. So I'm Claire Foulquier-Gazagne, and I will be talking to you about how we partner with civic and news organizations to launch the type of feature Cici has just presented. Cici and I have actually one thing in common. We both have political sciences degree, but that doesn't make us election experts, nor Google. Why? Because for an election like the EU election, to be a true expert, you would need to understand the voting law of 27 EU countries. So maybe some of you in the room are true experts. We are not, and that's why we need partners. So let me take you through our partnership journey, but start at the end of the process and go backward. So this is the feature we are going to launch in a few days soon, where you will see how you can vote. And hopefully for everyone in the room and beyond, that will be a way for you to understand how can I cast my ballots, can I vote early, can I use proxy voting in my country, in my own language. But as you can see on this feature, at the top you see the European Parliament. We could not launch this feature without them. Why? Because they are the one that highlights the action each of us will need to take to vote. And this is what you see underneath. And then all of the content below, this is from the EU Parliament websites. They have collected information from 27 electoral commissions in 24 EU official language, and we are using this to make that feature work. But let me take back to the beginning of this journey. How do we select a partner like the EU Parliament when we start thinking about an election? Again, we come back to these same criteria. And I don't think they will surprise anyone given the theme of this summit, especially accuracy. Like, we want to make sure that the data we source is factual and is current and correct. Timeliness is also very important in an election. We want to make sure we have the right dates. For instance, if there is a voting registration deadline, we want to make sure we have exactly the right time so you can know about it. Non-partisanship also is a non-brainer. We want the information to be factual. And finally, we look at authoritativeness. We want to make sure we are working with the primary sources for election. And so often that means the election authority that organizes the election. It's actually quite a journey. You will see the feature in not so long, and you might think, okay, this is life, but then you don't really see all the work it takes to get there. And actually, we start working with a partner like the EU Parliament about a year before an election, because we need to understand what are their plans, what type of content are they thinking of publishing, what are the key dates, and so on. And so we start working together, and then it's a very iterative process. Like we work together to really understand what's the content, what's the user needs back and forth. And we do simulation, and we take feedback until we launch the feature. So I'm happy to share again our top 2 partners for this election. So for the How to Vote feature, we are working directly with the EU Parliament. I see some familiar faces in this room, and I want to deeply thank them because they are very much doing the heavy lifting of working with all of these electoral commissions all across Europe to aggregate the contents. For our live result feature that CC has shown you, we are working again with European Parliament, but via DPA Infocom. DPA is the leading press German agency, and we have been working with them since the last election cycle. And I'm also very thankful to them, and I see some of them in the audience. So again, all of this to say, we are not in this fight of democracy alone. Yes, there is Google, but without our partner, we could not bring this authoritative information front and center on the top of Google search. Thank you. And now I will pass the mic to Cici to talk about election integrity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Claire. So I'm Dixie O'Donnell, and I'm actually on the Trust and Safety Strategic Command team, and I partner very, very closely with our global election integrity team in preparing to respond to incidents during elections. Today, I'll talk about my team and share some of Google's readiness in the election integrity space. I've been with Strategic Command for about 3.5 years now. Over that time, it has evolved from being a more traditional incident management team but specialized in tackling abuse across multiple products to its current form as Google's Trust and Safety Strategic Command. As you see reflected in our mission statement here, my team gets ready for what's coming, whether it's foreseen or unforeseen. It leads during incidents of abuse on Google platforms and big events that impact people and Google platforms, and incorporates lessons learned from what we did and experienced during those events. This evolved mission reflects the changing world we live in, where global and local events are much more dynamic, new tech emerges fast, and can affect people in multiple locations at one time, both in the real world and online. Readiness is a key pillar of our work. My team identifies events and issues with potential for high impact to people who use Google products and Google platforms. Events and issues can range from product launches and significant emergent technology to real-world events that impact Google products, such as elections. Then we drive readiness initiatives that help Google identify and mitigate key risks and readiness gaps. But as no solution is perfect, people learn and technology evolves, we must always be ready to act against abuse. The Strategic Command's core role remains incident and risk response through 24/7 global operations. To enhance trust and safety's readiness and response capabilities, we assess and enhance it across the following key areas on the right. In part, thinking through scenarios and running tabletop exercises to explore how events and issues could play out. So we go over, we look at technology and product. How does it work? Are there risks from this tech? Policies. What do our policies already cover? And are there gray areas that we need to clarify? Operations. What operational readiness planning do we need to do right now before there's a problem? What issue or event-specific protocols do we need, and when do they need to be ready? For a scheduled event like an election, what products are most used in that country? How do we apply lessons learned from similar events we've seen in the past? geopolitical dynamics, of course, what regional or local developments may heighten or drive risk. And this can be local political developments, urgent legal and regulatory obligations, interstate tensions or conflicts, or perhaps our partner Mandiant has identified an influence operation, and that could affect an election. And also emerging issues. What areas appear to be emerging, even if we don't fully understand what they are yet? And that could be something like the COVID-19 pandemic, a major natural disaster coinciding maybe with an election. Is there misinformation or disinformation around these events? What products could they affect and how? Because every product is quite different, and then they interact with and influence each other. And of course, all of these areas can affect elections. Turning more specifically to elections, I'll share a bit more of what Google does to protect them. Strategic Command works with all of the teams here to support the 3 core objectives you've already heard about. Claire just told you mostly about that first core objective, and my team supports it by detecting election misinformation and drives cross-product response to take it down and stop its spread when novel misinformation that we haven't prevented from getting on the platform begins to surface, because those narratives tend to evolve. The second core objective is protecting our platforms from abuse, which Amanda was highlighting earlier. Google wants to ensure that its products and platforms are not used to interfere with elections. This means working to prevent the spread of misinformation, disinformation, as well as other harmful content. It also means working to protect the privacy of voters and their personal information from things like scams and cyber attacks. And then in support of this activity, Strategic Command contributes what it has learned from these types of abuse incidents in the past, and along with our intel partners, identify emerging trends and opportunities for prevention before the elections take place. And finally, helping campaigns enhance their security. Google wants to help campaigners protect themselves from cyber attacks through actions such as investment and education for campaigners on cybersecurity and on protection technologies implemented in our products. And these include Project Shield and the Advanced Protection Program. And when institutions or individuals outside of these programs using Google products experience cyber attacks or hacking, Strategic Command is ready to work with our product teams to act quickly. And that's it for now, and I will hand over to Milan.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Milan, and I work as a public policy manager at Google, based out of here in Brussels. And I'm working on issues related to content moderation, information quality, which, of course, includes fighting misinformation. You've already heard from Annette that our mission is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. And our services, such as search, news, YouTube, make it really easy for users to discover a broad range of high-quality information from a variety of sources. But just raising the trustworthy information, it's not enough. So it's really important to prevent the spread of misinformation online, because helping people sort of separate fiction from facts has never been more important. And that's particularly true, of course, during the elections, because if you heard, this is the time this is really the crunch time. And it's also relevant when it comes to generative AI. As you've heard from Amanda, an important part of introducing AI technologies is anticipating and testing for a wide range of risks. And that's why we've developed a set of guidelines, for example, protecting against unfair bias, having in-house red teaming experts and programs that test for potential areas of abuse, and also creating and outlining sort of harmful, inappropriate, or misleading content we do not allow on our platforms. We also do empower users with more information and context, as you've heard, for example, around the elections, to help them better evaluate the content they see online. We've developed a number of products, from fact-check labels to publisher knowledge panels, to really help people develop their own critical thinking about what they are reading. When you search on Google, you can click on those 3 small dots to give you information about the page. Who is behind the information, when the first time we index that page. We call this feature about this result. It's now available in every language in Europe. We've also added these experiences in generative AI in search. And we also introduced new ways to help people to understand responses they see in Gemini. We recently announced funding into 5 new research areas, research projects to really help examine the ways technology can help fight misinformation. And this funding will support research and several universities, organizations such as Full Fact. And in all this, obviously, media literacy is absolutely crucial. It's also clearly there's an unmet demand because according to a report by Ipsos, fewer than 1 in 10 Europeans, out of 10 Europeans, have participated in any form of online media literacy training. And 60% of the respondents actually say they want to learn more. So we know that there is this demand. And it sounds like a cliche, but we really know that there's no one-size-fits-all solutions in media literacy. It's really important to keep the local approaches in mind, and it's not something that we can do alone. The collaboration clearly is a leitmotif of today. Collaboration with academics, policymakers, publishers, civil society organizations is really a key. You've heard from Paolo about the European Media and Information Fund. Google was the first company to invest 25 million to help launch the fund, to fight misinformation, to strengthen media literacy skills, to support fact-checking. And again, it's really important to stress that the fund is completely independent from Google. And we are really excited to see many great results and many great projects being supported by the fund. And we look forward to seeing more. As you're going to hear from Vincent, we have also provided trainings on a wide range of topics to journalists. I will leave you to speak a little bit more about that. Also to help strengthen fact-checking, Google operating by the IFC and the International Fact-Check Network. So far, 55 organizations, including 13 European organizations, have received funding from this through this means. Also to help raise awareness of the transparency tools and features, such as about the results that I just mentioned. Google launched a so-called Train the Trainers program called Super Searchers for librarians and library staff in order to improve their media literacy skills. And we are continuing to expand the partnership to roll out this really important program. In March 2022, after the invasion to Ukraine, we committed $10 million to Central European organizations to help fight misinformation. This includes new partnerships with civil society organizations, cash grants to support NGOs and fact-check networks. For example, in CEE, we supported Demagog in Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, the Baltic Center for Media Excellence in Estonia, the Civil Resilience Initiative in Lithuania, and FMO in the Czech Republic, and somebody who is coming from that region. I cannot really imagine more important work. Google.org, our philanthropic branch, has supported a number of organizations working also on media literacy, online safety for children, for example, using Google's open source curriculum. We're also supporting NGOs right now to integrate AI into their programs. We've supported with $3.5 million grant to School in Class, a Polish NGO that is planning to train 1 million kids in the region in 11 countries of CEE. And also, there's a $1 million grant to Bibliothèque Sans Frontières, a Belgian organization, Belgian nonprofit that is running their own cyber heroes research. So I was planning to also speak a little bit about the jigsaw, but since some of my colleagues and other speakers have been already introducing this, so I will skip that. Also realizing that me and Vincent are the last people keeping you from the coffee break. So let me just stop by also stressing our contribution to the European Fact-Check Standard Network that is going to be discussed a little bit more in detail later in the afternoon. You've also heard about Tech Accord. Why I mention it here is there's one dedicated section specifically working on media literacy. And of course, I cannot stop without mentioning the strengthened EU Code of Practice on Disinformation. The reports will be out very soon. And one of the important commitments is around empowering users and also promoting media literacy. So you can also read all those hundreds of pages from us and other signatories to learn more about these efforts. Thank you very much, and over to Vincent.
Thanks, Milan. My name is Vincent Ryan. I'm with our News Partnerships team. I'm a recovering journalist myself, and I am going to talk to you about our work with journalists. So we do a lot of work with journalists and fact-checkers. These are at the front line of fighting misinformation. They tend to encounter it first and are also some of the best people to fight against it. We do this through empowering journalists, whether it's giving them tools to identify locations and geolocate images using Google Street View, or checking the authenticity of a image or a quote using advanced search, or using Google Fact Check Explorer to make sure that they're not repeating a debunk that has already been done. There's a vast range of tools that we can train journalists on to help them tell the story of the election campaign. Through the Google News Initiative since 2015 across EMEA, we've trained more than 180,000 journalists and journalism students, which is an incredible number. And we've done this on a range of tools, which are, the goal is to help them find, verify, and tell news stories online. That's, in this year alone, it's nearly 18,000 journalists that we have gotten to with training. We've spent hours hosting workshops, visiting the newsrooms, going to universities, and basically promoting tools that we have identified from Google and other providers that will help journalists verify, visualize, and tell stories. Many of our team are former journalists. Louisa at the back is from Journalism Past. You may have seen her earlier at one of our training. We understand the pressure that journalists are under during the busiest election period. They need just a quick refresher, often on new tools, to help them get through the day. So our goal is to be practical and helpful tools that will help them. One of our newest programs that we've launched is our Misinfo Lab. Some of you may have been lucky enough to participate in this morning. It's a scenario-based training and workshop which simulates a breaking news environment, and it'll expose you to the deadline pressures that journalists are under and trying to make those snap decisions whether or not to run a story. We worked with PA Media in the UK to develop this, and we're now giving newsrooms a chance to go through and test their editorial processes in a safe space to see if they're going to make the decision and what the consequences of those decisions are. The goal of this is to help journalists learn in a safe environment on the go. In addition, we have our website, which is g.co/news training. This is translated into 18 languages, and on it we have a vast range of courses and how-tos where you can just dip in, find a tool, find how to use it, and there's a quick guide. We've also added a guide to AI on it quite recently, so if you want to learn a little bit more about artificial intelligence, that's probably a good place to go. Obviously, we also work with fact checkers, and this is not new to us. We've been working with them since 2015. In 2015, we collaborated in France with a project which was called Crosscheck. This was a collaboration of, I think, in the region of 37 news organizations who worked together to try and reduce the duplication of information, helping them to verify and share information on debunks that had already been out there. Again, in France in in the 2022 elections, there was a big movement called Opération Disinfox, which included our partners AFP. This was 23 organizations who came together to tackle misinformation and strengthen digital verification. Collectively, they published 225 reports and clarifications around debunks. In Germany, meanwhile, we had Factcheck 21, and this was another initiative that we supported, partnering with DPA, and we provided training on structured data and schema to our local newsrooms, as well as a collaborative forum for them to share fact checks across the country. We've also done similar efforts in countries as diverse as Sweden, Philippines, Argentina, Brazil. We're currently running one in South Africa, and we have 6 more planned for Africa if anyone wants to come and talk to me later on. And hopefully 1 or 2 more in the UK, which also has an election coming up. As you have heard earlier, we have launched our broadest electoral coalition, which is with the EFCSN. So this is the first of its kind open database which will collect and categorize fact checks. So there will be political fact checks, disinformation, debunks, pre-bunking articles. All of them will be tagged, and researchers will be able to explore them. It's going to hopefully show transcontinental trends which have been reported by the coalition of 40+ fact-checking organizations across Europe, and it's known as Elections 24 Check. The coalition members will also have access to some new beta features on Google's Fact Check Explorer, and this includes image in context, which allows fact-checking organizations to upload images, and then they can see where it has been used before online, a timeline as to places where it's been peered, and whether or not it has been debunked. It's a very, very useful tool for fact-checkers, particularly in the decontextualization of images. There's also going to be some tagging of AI, so we're going to see how broadly that's been used to to spread misinformation. And we'll also provide some training on how to use all of these tools and understand when they were first appeared. In addition, as Milan mentioned, we have the Global Fact Check Fund, which was the largest fund that Google has contributed to, where we contributed 13.2 million to the IFCN. This is the International Fact-Checking Network. After the first year of operation, there have been 75 fact-checkers have been funded across 65 countries, which included 18 European projects which have received funding. Google has no role or decision in making the grants, and we partner with these very independent organizations so there's full transparency and that the correct people get the money. Separately, and finally, Google has contributed 25 million to the European Misinformation Fund with our great partners, the EUI, the European University Institute, and the Kalous-Gulbenkian Foundation. Google, again, has no role in making any decisions on this, and so far 78 projects covering fact-checking, media literacy, and misinformation have all been awarded funds. And you can see all the details of the funded projects at emifund.eu. And we are committed to training newsrooms across every single one of the 26 countries which are participating in the election this year. If you are aware of a newsroom that would like some training, please feel free to reach out and contact us. contactgni@google.com is a very good email address that you can get in touch. We will do our best to get to the newsroom either through our teaching fellows or through our scaled training networks. Lastly, if you want to check out our great training site, there it is. And I think that's it. I'll hand back to Kasia.
Vincent, thank you so much. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. The subject matter experts, you put the questions to Google, they listened. Hopefully some of your questions have been answered. If you want more questions answered, these very, very lovely and approachable experts will be outside during the coffee break, which is coming up, so do approach them. They don't bite, they're brilliant. So thank you so much. Big round of applause. Back here in 20 minutes, please, for you joining online, 20 minutes. So I expect you back here at 3:30 Central Europe time, please. Have a good break, keep the conversation going, and I'll see you in 20 minutes. Thank you. Well done, everybody. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, welcome back. I hope you had a good break. I hope you've had a good conversation outside, and I'm expecting plenty more engagement from you today. So whether you're joining us in the room, lovely to see you all in person, whether you're joining us online, a very warm welcome to Fighting Misinformation Online. Now, we have been talking about the upcoming elections a lot today. And you may think, well, we're the ones that are interested, we're in a bit of a bubble. Absolutely not. Lots of people, as we saw already a little bit earlier on from our subject matter experts, people are interested in these elections. The new Google Trends Elections Hub has been showing us about the topics that people have been particularly interested in when it comes to these upcoming elections in June. So I'm going to show you a question, because today is about getting you guys thinking as well, getting you guys interacted in the discussion. Can you guess the most searched political topics in Europe? I'll give you 3 options, and I want a show of hands for both. So, my esteemed team, let's have a look at what possibilities there are in terms of what people have been looking at. For those of you who think it is option number 1, cost, Ukraine, and salary, please raise your hands. I'm asking you to think quickly, digesting this information quickly. Okay, there's about 5, 6 of you. Okay, a little bit more. What about option 2, education, artificial intelligence, and Israel? This is over okay, ooh, interesting. Okay, so more than half of you think it's option 2. What about option 3, energy, agriculture, cost? All right, very interesting. So most of you in the room, online apologies, but in the room, most of the people here think that most people who are looking at and searching for topics around the election are interested in education, artificial intelligence, and Israel. You're wrong. It's option 1, cost, Ukraine, and salary. That is what the Google Election Trends Hub has found. Most people are interested in those top 3 searches: cost, Ukraine, and salary. It just gives you a little bit of an insight into what people are interested in. These are the things that people are most interested in. Let's just narrow in into the age group now. We're going to hear from what some young people are interested in from this little video that we're going to play to you now.
Secondo me l'intelligenza artificiale è e può essere il futuro sotto tantissimi aspetti, dal discorso medicale, sanitario, matematico, calcoli, però va utilizzata, sfruttata et controllata nella maniera corretta, altrimenti può essere pericoloso.
En fait, ça peut être positif, ça dépend juste de comment on l'utilise. Si on l'utilise trop, il y aura des répercussions négatives, mais si on est au juste milieu entre l'IA et les hommes, je pense que ça peut faire des belles choses.
They also say AI is going to take your job, and I see AI as a tool, as a helpful tool, like, I don't know, a very talented colleague that you can, like, can they create something?
Può risparmiare del tempo, ma può essere anche un grande problema, specie nell'ambito dell'informazione, perché la possibilità di poter compiere un deepfake, magari su un politico, su un personaggio importante, è talvolta fuorviante.
So just some of the issues that young people are really concerned about. We heard about deep fakes, the potential, though, for AI to create something beautiful as well. Some of the issues that we're going to address with our next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a listen to how YouTube are addressing the issues that these young people are concerned with. Please join me in welcoming onto our podium David Wielden, head of YouTube's Government Affairs and Public Policy team for Europe, the Middle East and Africa. David.
Thank you, Kasia. Well, I certainly feel, following the young people, that I perhaps am not in that category anymore. So thank you for making me feel my age. But look, what we've heard today is that this is a year for elections, and I want to talk about some of the challenges ahead and YouTube's approach to this moment globally and here in the EU. When it comes to supporting elections and civic engagement, we see our biggest job is to connect voters to authoritative information and to protect election integrity. Those 2 things, and I'm going to talk about 3 ways that we do this on YouTube. First, how we support voters and an informed citizenry. Secondly, how our existing work on media literacy and responsibly managing content is working out. And finally, what we're doing to address AI-generated misinformation, which we've also heard a lot of today. So first, let's discuss supporting voters and an informed citizenry. So people, especially younger internet users, as we've just heard and as we're going to hear after me, come to YouTube to learn about every aspect of life, and that includes elections. They clearly want to find out more about political topics and the figures taking part in and shaping debates. Civic engagement has been completely transformed by the internet. YouTube, indeed, has evolved so much that things have transformed again just in the last decade. Diverse voices are thriving. New perspectives are finding airtime and audiences. We recognize that with YouTube's reach, we have a responsibility to support civic engagement and an informed population. Now, there's often a long run-up to polling day with different rules about campaigning that are unique to every country. We've heard that today. So this requires from us a multi-layered approach. We're working hard to ensure that YouTube is a reliable source for timely news and information for everyone. And a major way we do this is by effectively connecting people to trustworthy, high-quality election news and information by leveraging our always-on news features. Let me give you some examples. So when viewers search for news-related topics on YouTube, they will often see a top news selection near the top of search results, which displays relevant results from an authoritative source. The breaking news shelf appears directly on the homepage, featuring relevant videos from authoritative news sources about news events of national importance such as elections. To provide more context about news sources, we also provide funding information, which may be displayed for government or publicly funded publishers. In addition, during key civics and election moments, we take additional efforts to raise information from authoritative sources, such as information panels on YouTube search and watch pages that contain information about how to vote, how to register candidates and election results, and voter public service announcements, which provide viewers links to timely authoritative information about the voting process directly on the YouTube homepage. So while we take a global approach to our election integrity work, context is crucial. And we always try to take into account local context and partner with outside experts where appropriate. These can include civil society organizations, governments, and academic institutions. Now let's talk about media literacy and also, crucially, responsibly managing content on our platform. At the viewer level, we're equipping voters with media literacy skills to detect misinformation. YouTube's Hit Pause is a campaign made of short, engaging, animated clips which engage viewers, particularly younger ones, and encourage them to assess content that they watch and share. In fact, in the second half of 2023, Hit Pause videos have been watched more than 500 million times across the EU. At the same time, we rigorously enforce our community guidelines or our rules of the road, our content policies, which are based on a decade of experience. We do this with 20,000 content moderators across Google globally and covering multiple languages. It's important to note these policies apply everywhere, to everyone, everywhere, at any time, from private citizens sharing their music to the world's most public figures. These policies apply to all forms of content, including election materials and party political broadcasts, regardless of the political viewpoints expressed, the language they're in, or how the content is generated. We also have policies specifically created for elections. For example, content that misleads voters on how to encourage or how to vote, or encourages interference in the democratic process more widely, is prohibited on YouTube. And we also remove any content that, for example, incites violence, encourages hatred, promotes harmful conspiracy theories, or threatens election workers. Now, alongside these 20,000 content moderators across Google, YouTube has automated systems that flag content that might cross the line for human review. And that technology is effective and keeps on improving. In fact, over 96% of the content removed is first detected by automated systems, which enables us to take quick action. And over 3/4 of videos removed in the last few months of last year were removed before receiving 10 views. These strategies have all been part of our elections toolbox for many years, and we work hard to invest in them and indeed improve them over time. But as we've been hearing today, generative AI is here and it's changing the landscape. AI has been an important ongoing focus for YouTube for some time now. The creators who use our platform explore these exciting new technologies. At the same time, we know that AI introduces risks that bad actors might try to exploit during an election. And in particular, that applies to harmful deep fakes. Now, it's important to remember our misinformation policies have long prohibited manipulated content that misleads users and could pose a serious risk of egregious harm. For election ads specifically, we require advertisers to disclose when their ads include digitally altered or generated materials. But as AI becomes more sophisticated, it may be difficult for viewers to discern when the content they're watching is real or not. And we believe it's in everyone's interest to maintain a healthy ecosystem of information on YouTube. So to do that, we have started to roll out new policies which apply to content that your viewers are watching that might be made with generative AI. As of this week, we're launching the next phase of our work. This includes a new requirement for creators to show when the content they're uploading contains altered or synthetic media and importantly, is realistic. That way viewers understand what they're watching. Now look, we're not going to do this for all content that involves generative AI, but when the video could easily be mistaken for a realistic person or place or event, we will require labels. There will be new labels tied to the disclosures that creators have to make, and they will appear within the video description. And if content is related to sensitive topics like health, news, elections, or finance, we're also going to display a label on the video itself in the player window. I just want to remind everybody, though, all videos, whether they contain AI elements, are subject or not, are subject to our community guidelines. So if it violates our policies, regardless of whether it has AI in it, we will take the necessary action, including removing it. Synthetic content that incites violence, for example, will still be taken down, even if it's labeled as containing AI. While we expect our creators to self-disclose when they've used altered or synthetic content in their videos, we may also apply a label to some videos in cases where this disclosure hasn't occurred, especially when the content discusses sensitive topics. Strengthening transparency is vital in the fight against misinformation, and we believe that labels are a really important part of this. These are some of the steps we're taking to fulfill our commitment to embrace AI boldly and responsibly. But look, we recognize it's an ongoing process, and we'll continue to evolve and iterate as we go to ensure we're balancing the tremendous benefits that this technology offers with the continued safety of our community. So look, to conclude, an event like the one today, which enables us to hear from a multitude of perspectives, is absolutely crucial. The organizations here are typical of the partners we work with on fighting misinformation. And it's been really informative to sit here and listen to the other speakers about their perspectives. This is a big year for elections, but the future holds plenty more. We are constantly learning and updating the way our platform runs. We have teams around the world that continuously track developments to ensure we're equipped with the latest information and that voters can easily access reliable, trustworthy content. At YouTube, we remain vigilant and committed to working together to play our part in protecting the integrity of the democratic process. Let's hope we can all succeed in this together.
Thank you. It's fascinating to get those insights and interesting especially to hear how labeling is really important in YouTube's fight to tackle election misinformation. I can't let you go without just one more question. I feel like Columbo now. Some researchers have been questioning the role of recommendations in the context of elections. David, what is YouTube doing to manage the potential negative impact of recommendations?
Yeah, interesting, and I did note in some of the Q&A earlier that that question was asked, and it was asked specifically about YouTube. So let me just give you the framework around recommendations. The important thing about recommendations is they're not just a harmful thing, they're also something that we use critically to connect people with the high-quality news and information that I was talking about. That's what recommendations enable us to do. Our systems learn from about 80 billion signals. And critically, they don't promote or filter content based on any individual political perspective. That's really important part. And that's how we help to support elections, by raising up information from authoritative content or sources so that viewers can find that content. The other thing that recommendations do is that they help us to reduce the visibility of content that's on the borderline, the sort of content that doesn't necessarily breach our policies, but we don't necessarily want to be widely viewed. And the recommendation systems work in both ways. I want to just directly address the question about the sort of the follow the money question. From YouTube's point of view, it is not in our interests financially to recommend content that either drives people down to rabbit holes or promotes extremism or promotes misinformation, because that's not what advertisers want. It's not what our viewers want. It doesn't keep them on the platform anymore. And so actually it is in our interests to make sure that our recommendation systems address both the raising up of content and the reducing and the removal of content that might breach our policies.
David, thank you very much. And thank you very much for picking up on the questions that a number of you had a little bit earlier on. David Wilden from YouTube, thank you. So we've been hearing how YouTube has been tackling the issues that we've been fully focused on today. We're now going to see how people are using the platform for themselves.
Hello, folks.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Marvin Neumann. I'm a journalist and YouTube creator, and I'm reporting about domestic politics in Germany from Germany.
I'm Manon, known as Daring Tia on my YouTube channel. I'm a French, Parisian content creator.
I'm John D. Ruddy, and I'm a writer, actor, illustrator, and YouTuber.
In Germany, it's going to be the first time around that 16 and 70-year-olds are allowed to vote. I do believe for the 16 and 70-year-olds, and honestly also the ones up to 25-ish, they will find their information online. When I want to reach a young audience, I normally tend to kind of jump on trends which are anyways already online, which are popular amongst a young audience, and then actually reacting on it or actually putting more context to the video in itself. My approach is to report very much neutral, objective, without any opinion, and very much, calm. Don't waste any time with anything. Get to the point, get to the facts, and that will be the entertainment people look for when they actually want to inform themselves about elections.
It's something that I've been told many times. I do not watch the news any longer. Something like your YouTube channel helps me to get all the information I need. I try to just showcase that there's fake news. I'm not trying to teach them for real because I'm not a teacher. I'm not trying to babysit them or something like that. But I think the more and more people try to just maybe take a step back, first thing. If you see something that's shocking, revolting, you need to take a step back and to just maybe look through the sources, because I talk a lot about the news on a weekly basis on YouTube, and if I see something, I need to cross all my references.
When it comes to combating misinformation around contemporary political issues, I always think context is everything. Nothing happens in a vacuum. The world that we're in today is built on the foundations of centuries and millennia. I made a video of the history of Ukraine in 2022, and it was fascinating even for myself to take this one region and see how it changed over millennia, how the geography shaped its fate, but then also trying to debunk the Russian narrative of the time, that Ukraine was Russian. My philosophy is history is way too important to be boring. It's not just for history nerds like myself. History should be accessible to everyone because it continues to shape the world we live in.
Now, as if by magic, we have one of those brilliant contributors joining us live. Let me introduce you to, no introductions needed, Manon Delcourt, otherwise known as Daring Tia. Over to you.
Hello everyone, a bit crowded. I'm not used to such a big crowd, just me, myself and my camera in my room as usual, but if I stutter or choke on my words, you'll know why. Well, as everyone doesn't know me or know of my work, I will start with a quick introduction of myself to begin with. So my name is Manon, and since now 5 years, I've started my YouTube channel called Daring Tia. And I was celebrating the 5 years a few weeks ago, so happy birthday to my channel. The main topics you will find on my channel gravitate around social matters, such as feminism, fight against all kinds of discrimination, political news, and also talks and testimonies related to the subject. I am what people call, and I know it may sound like the motto of a new superhero, an outspoken person fighting for social justice, but I truly think that my platform should be used for something called the greater good. Since the elections are coming up, I've been asked a very good question by the YouTube and Google team recently, which is, how do I think creators on video sharing platforms should use storytelling skills to engage users on social and political issues? And well, I have a few answers to that because I myself became more vocal and engaging on political issues since the previous French presidential elections of 2022. Why did I choose to speak on these topics on my channel? Well, I think it might be first because of more maturity, turning 28, so became more mature, well, I hope, on the political topic, or maybe because year after year, I'm becoming more and more involved in the French political agenda. But I saw the presidency of 2022 like a real turning point on all of my social networks, because as much as we have access to more information at a speed that really defies everything we could have hoped for, it also became quite a struggle because on many interviews, politicians back then in 2022 were saying A, B, C, D, but in the social networks, we were just receiving the B part, or in the worst cases, the fake news, the XYZ that wasn't even said, that was just doctored. And even though I did not support all French politicians, of course, to me it was rather standard that they all should have their true message given out. And therefore, on a daily basis, I started to decrypt politician speeches and interviews to my followers, just through my Instagram stories first, and then through longer videos on YouTube then. And slowly but surely, I noticed quite quickly a keen interest on this subject, even from very, very young viewers who didn't even have the age to vote, but they wanted to understand how the political world is working. And how did I manage to engage on politics? Well, I've put 4 things in my plan, if I can call it that way. First, I simply started by implementing the subject of politics a little bit more on all of my contents, just so my viewers got used to the fact that I'm talking about it slowly but surely, sorry. Then at some point I decided to directly ask my audience whether or not politics are a topic that they want to hear about on my channel, and in what way they will hear about it, if so. Engaging with them was the central the central part of my plan through implementing politics on my content, because I gave them a central place back then, and this is how, to me, it should always be done, by directly engaging with the said audience and to really give them space and also power. And at the end, I also urge them, like I still do today, to look through different sources to make sure everything is legit, whatever I say or whatever they read or hear somewhere else, and also to know more about the political landscape, since, well, you really don't know this word, even though you can turn the TV on every day. And how should creators really do then, to me, to engage the said users on the political and social issues? Well, first, I think there's something very important to tell to every creators and so every viewers and the Gen Z for most of them, because they are the next voters. They need to know that politics are not big bad monsters that no one should talk about, because right now I feel that there's a huge taboo on the social networks and also in my generation regarding politics. But also, today we live in a world where the power of storytelling has transcended traditional boundaries. It has become a real potent tool, not just for entertainment, but also for shaping opinions, raising awareness, and igniting social change. So for me, now more than ever, for real, creators on video sharing platforms just like me, we hold a unique responsibility in utilizing the storytelling prowess to engage users on critical social and political issues. And for that, they should do some simple steps. Using authenticity, because honesty and transparency build trust and credibility around what will be a meaningful dialogue. Empathy, because one should always empathize with diverse viewpoints, lived experiences, acknowledging the complexity of social and political issues. The most important that we are quoting this morning, fact-checking. For that, myself, I use websites like Polyfact or Factcheckers, Snopes, and many others, because we need to do it. Call to action, because creators have the power to galvanize their audience into meaningful activism, and also, to conclude, lead by example, because it all starts somewhere, and I think that as creators we have a responsibility to make a good beginning of it. Thank you.
Daring Tia, otherwise known as Manon Delcourt, thank you so much for sharing how you engage with that younger audience, your younger audience. I'm now a follower, so I've massively brought up your average age. Excuse me, sorry about that. But look, we're going to keep the focus on young people because, as we've been hearing already today, a number of countries have really lowered the voting age for these upcoming parliamentary elections. How are young people receiving this? Well, next we're going to be joined by a group of young citizens, and it's thanks to Better Internet for Kids. This is an initiative which has been launched by the European Commission. These young citizens will be speaking to Daniel Florov from the Think Young think tank, a Brussels-based organisation. I welcome you onto the stage.
So, welcome. I hope everyone is seated. So, welcome to our panel. I'm going to be the moderator, as I was already said, representing Think Young, right? We do some research on young people, and this is why we're trying to also give the youth perspective now today. So, building trust, media literacy with and for young people, and we have the young people here. So, with us, we have Billy, Constantinu, and May Tracy from Ireland. We have Daria, who is from Romania. We have Adrian and Carolina, who are from Spain. Dimitris and Christina from Cyprus. And Vincent from Croatia. So thank you. Just to put in perspective, I'm also 27, so I'm quite young. But they're even younger. I think they're even younger. But yeah, so today's agenda will go as following. So I'll give you a brief background. Actually, maybe not, because I think some was already said about what BIC is. But these are the ambassadors of BIC. So then we'll follow on with the questions, actually, towards the BIC ambassadors. Maybe they can tell us what we actually do and what it is. So we start with Christina, precisely with this question. So Christina, as a BIC ambassador, what do you do?
Well, starting off, I feel like involving yourself in any Better Internet for Kids activity, you kind of fall into a rabbit hole, if you will, full of interesting events, information, activities that may occur, such as this one we're here for today. Thank you so much for having us, by the way. And, well, BIC Youth has opened many doors to a variety of events and to its members, and some of them being the DSA focus group, the FMO we're here for today, and many others that I probably can't list right now. Being able to receive such wonderful opportunities and actually seeing progress being made regarding the issues that we brought up as a team, it's actually really showing what BIC Youth is really all about. And becoming a BIC ambassador is, to cut it short, actually wanting to a continuation of being able to participate in events like this one, and actually also receiving updates and information regarding actions that may occur all around Europe. Something that a person who's not a member or has never been a member before of such teams such as BIC has actually not experienced yet.
So thank you very much. No, I think it's very important to keep young people active. I mean, we see you are probably bringing down the average age here by a lot, as already mentioned. But yeah, I mean, Carolina, maybe you can tell us, as a young person, where do you actually get your news from?
Sure. Nowadays, most of young people get their news from the social media. That's not a secret. when you're scrolling on TikTok or on Instagram and casually appears a video about European elections, for example, and appears a person saying, "Hi, I work for the European Parliament." Something in our minds says that we can trust on them, but really we don't know that person. We don't know if he or she is telling the truth or not. So that inspires us to look for more information about what he or she has said, and we must be very careful with these things, because, for example, when we vote and we only have watched videos and we haven't looked for more information, maybe we're not giving our opinion 100% because of the misinformation.
So thank you. No, I think that quite clearly shows the difference between older generations and your generation. So where we get our news from. Speaking about influencers, we just had one, I think. YouTube creator is still an influencer, I think. Maybe in this context, maybe I can ask May, how do you actually see the role of these influencers in media?
Thanks for the question. I think the influencers have a great opportunity to connect with youth in general. Like they have this massive platform where they can reach youth very easily. And I think after time, there is kind of a trust build-up, like you trust your TV presenter after you've watched them for 10 years. And if you see this influencer posting that they just registered for voting or they just voted, maybe not screaming their political views saying you should vote for this, I'm talking just in general, they voted. And it could reach 1,000, 10,000, 1 million, 1 billion people. Yeah, they might not all be voting for the same elections, but they might be voting for their local elections. So it does inspire young people to vote, and especially if they include, say, in their bio, just a YouTube video of explaining the elections, that they say the EU elections, what's going on, what you're actually voting on, and even including a government website that has true, factual, trusted information leading youth into how they can actually vote and getting involved. So influencers really have a great playing ground for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's quite clear. Thank you. I mean, in this context, right? So, what is misinformation? What is false information? How do we find out what it is? This is a question now for Daria. How did you actually learn about countering disinformation?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's very interesting. I started learning about countering misinformation when I joined Save the Children Romania, and then afterwards Better Internet for Kids. And then I became an ambassador for both of them. So after I followed some trainings and started to gain a little bit more information regarding this topic, I started speaking in front of other young people myself and telling them about the threats related to this subject. And learning from these experiences, I believe that we should bring this topic about misinformation regarding elections more, because it is rarely brought up, especially in schools. And I think most young people don't know about the importance behind voting, and that one specific vote has a very big impact upon a society.
Thank you. No, I mean, we're going to follow this actually with Dimitri. Maybe you can tell us, did you also, your experience of how you learned to counter misinformation, or at least about misinformation, was it from school? How did you learn about it? Was it different from her experience?
Thank you for the floor. To give you a bit of more background before I dive in, I've been active in the internet safety field since I was 11 years old. I'm almost 18 now, just for context. While I've learned some things from school, I feel like most of the skills I developed and knowledge I gained was from outside of school. It was either from events, for example, like the Safer Internet Days that occur every year in February. But also, I think the most important experience to me about misinformation was a project I was part on through Cyprus Cyber Safety Youth Panel, which was called Misinformation Antibodies, where we had the chance to, first of all, like gain knowledge, broad knowledge on the subject, but also develop workshops and educational material that then got either into teachers or students, and we actually had the chance to do a few workshops. I work with students. Some of my teammates worked with parents. And also through my own personal research, I have my school thankfully is kind of supportive. Last year I did a workshop in my class about social media in general, and a part of it that we talked and discussed about misinformation. So you have to have a lot of background to actually being able to provide this knowledge. So I think trying to teach either peers or adults, it really gives you, really gave me all the knowledge and skills I need to learn about misinformation, how to tackle it or distinguish it from real information.
Thank you. So talking about being an adult, maybe part of this is election. So I'm going to ask Vincent, why are you excited about the elections?
Well, you know, I am 18 years old now, so I just became a voter in Spain. I voted for the first time in the general elections. Well, I think that the act of voting is essential for the system to work, because at the end of the day, it's what democracy is based on. And, you know, without elections, people wouldn't be able to choose who's going to make the decisions that will shape their lives and their future. And I think it's especially important nowadays because we are in a moment of worldwide tension. Prices are rising, and you know we have crisis, social unrest, and conflicts in different parts of the world. And I think the future will only be better if we take actions now to improve it. And that's why I think every citizen has not only the right, but also the power to change the situation and to make a better future. So that's why I think that everybody should not only vote, but also vote responsibly in order to achieve this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So keeping this in mind, I think maybe I'm going to ask Billy. You see all these people. So there's people from the news, from media. There's people from policymakers. There's tech companies. What more do you want to see online?
Thank you, Daniel. So we see a lot that the majority of young people actually don't have a basic understanding of what elections are, and many of which actually don't even register to vote because they don't understand the significance that their vote can have. And I believe that media can definitely help to fix this problem. So I would love to see online content creators promoting voting on their platforms and explaining the significance that being politically active can have, obviously from a non-biased point of view. But I genuinely believe that these influencers can really have an impact on young people's lives because they look up to them and they trust them, as May said earlier. However, with that said, I believe that the real difference lies with the news, the policymakers, the educators, and the tech companies. Young people need information that is clear and accessible regarding elections that are happening at the moment. The problem that we find is that the official information is far too complex for voters to understand, whether that be young people or old people, but specifically young people. And the unofficial information that is released, as we've seen today, can be unreliable and can be biased. So to combat this problem, I think it is imperative that the policymakers, the news, the educators, give young people information that is clear-cut and understandable, removing all the political jargon and just getting down to the core information that is important to this particular election at hand. Because if we want young people to be active political citizens, we need them to understand what it means to be an active political citizen. And at the moment, a lot of young people just don't.
Thank you. That's quite clear. I think we should take notes. Yeah. Just a very quick question to anyone who wants to answer. As a young person, how do you think? Well, what do you think is the best strategy, maybe, to engage young people to vote? Anyone? Yeah, Vincent.
I
I mean, the best strategy, I guess, is to sort of make voting seem less of such like a big, challenge that's, typically for adults that know what they're doing. It's really hard as a young person to be taken seriously up until the age of like 18. And then once you finally like turn 18 and you're like the voting age, suddenly you're like hit with all of the responsibilities. And really, the best way that I think a person can sort of make voting seem more appealing is to sort of humanize it in a way that's like, well, influencers talking about it. You see people that like you like and you know about talking about politics, I think is just the best solution, because getting like information from certified sources that they don't have a face in your mind. It's kind of daunting and it's kind of intimidating, but once you put like a face to it, it's a lot easier.
Perfect. No, I think that's a perfect answer. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening to us, even. Thank you.
Daniel and the young citizens, thank you so much for just those insights there. I think it's really, when you hear somebody say it's hard to be taken seriously when you're that young. I mean, I'm way past 18, right? But it just puts it into perspective, and I think it's good for us to hear that firsthand. Thank you very much. And how eloquent were they? Puts me to shame, quite frankly. Well done, congratulations. So from the young person's perspective and the way that they get their news, let's look at the quality of that news. We're now going to be focusing on the importance of trust in the media, trust in politics, and how publishers and institutions can engage citizens online to tackle misinformation in these elections. So please join me in welcoming onto our very cosy seated area this time my next guest. It's Sophie Nicholson, the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Digital Investigation at AFP. Please join me. And also welcome back to Dr. Melissa Bassel from Cambridge University, who we saw a little bit earlier on, but we're now going to have a little bit more of an in-depth and intimate conversation here in this area. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming back.
Try and squeeze in. Very intimate.
It is cozy. I mean, I like this change in setup. It's to make you feel relaxed and get the truth out of you. Look, we're talking about a decline in trust. A lot of what we've been hearing about is a decline in trust. And I know, Sophie, that AFP have been really busy in trying to combat that, and you've got some very creative ways in trying to circumnavigate and get around that trend of a decline in trust. Share it with us.
I just wanted to say I was very heartened to hear Daring Tia talk about going to fact checkers for information on for the information that you're giving, because I find it very heartening as well to see the popularity of influencers who are really talking about news and current affairs. And I mean, it's not surprising. And I mean, obviously I'm a journalist talking, so I've always been interested in news, but to see that popularity for that kind of content, I think is great. And also coming to fact checkers. So yeah, coming back to what you were saying, I mean, I work at AFP, a global news agency, and we've built up a fact-checking team within the news agency. So we now have the biggest fact-checking team in the world, with more than 140 people working in 26 languages, so more languages than we work in within the news agency. And during that process, what we've seen alongside that is the growing challenges for our journalists verifying information, and the growing part of a journalist's job to verify information online. So we've created online training for future journalists, for journalism students, and for our own journalists, and for any journalists, with the support of the Google News Initiative. This is open to anybody, to help to show examples of our work and to show how we verified information, and that we keep updating, because there's so many changes in the platforms, in the tools, to try and enable working journalists to better get a grip on keeping up with all these changing, the way that narratives are now being led by political actors, by public figures. I mean, we see so many stories. I don't really want to, there's so many I don't want to mention, because I don't want to give more hot air to things that have gone, you know, but perhaps I won't. And you can just think about whichever one you can think about. But yeah, so there's some basic tools that many journalists are now aware of, but many aren't, and we're just trying to make a culture of that within AFP, but also just for any journalists we work with. And we go into journalism schools as well and talk to future journalists. And we've also, today we're launching a series of shorts on YouTube around focusing on misinformation in the European Union, and in different languages, because it's quite challenging to do them in lots of languages, but we're doing them in at least 8 different languages with subtitles, with just short examples of misinformation that we've fact-checked in different European countries, and the kind of and the ways that we've tackled it, in the hope that will help other journalists and anyone, because they're out there on YouTube, to find out new tools and to get an idea of narratives that have played out before and that we see play out again and again in different countries. Same technique, same examples of, you know, pictures of, and not with AI. I mean, occasionally with AI, but that's not the majority of what we're seeing at the moment. But very simple images, enlarged images of crowds that supposedly we've seen. I mean, we saw in the US, we've seen them in Zimbabwe. We see the same techniques again and again.
So when it comes to, so we've seen this repeating pattern of the same technique. So upon that, there's got to be a psychology behind that. Melissa, if you could just elaborate and help us to understand the thinking behind that, then.
Yeah, of course. I like to think of misinformation like a virus. It is equally rapidly spread. It is very contagious. It mutates. What we were worried about 5 years ago is different now. We're talking about AI and deepfakes a lot, whereas that was a different discussion 5 years ago. And it's very difficult to eradicate. Once it's out, misinformation tends to stick, and from a psychological perspective, at least, and from the sort of wealth of knowledge and research that exists in the cognitive behavioral sciences, we know that false and unverified information tends to spread faster and further than any other kind of information. We know that continued exposure to it makes it be perceived as more trustworthy. So 6 months from now, you are all more likely to remember that you saw something about that, and that is why it's probably true, rather than that it was continuously flagged as fake. And we know that it takes a lifetime, just by the vaccine and autism example, to disentangle that, right? And misinformation is by no means a new issue or a new phenomenon. We can go back in the history of humanity and point out some interesting phenomena here and there, but social media and AI has exacerbated that. So there are algorithms and filter bubbles and echo chambers, and they clash with something that is, at its core, quite an archaic, outdated brain, if you will. We are designed, evolutionary speaking, to seek out information from people that speak like us, that look like us, that sound like us, that think like us. We are cognitively better equipped to process and accept information that is aligned with our pre-existing beliefs. And so all of these mechanisms that usually keep us safe and back in the day maybe would have allowed us to create communities and cohesive small communities where we trust the village, we trust our neighbors. exacerbated by social media now means with each click and each follow and like and unfollow, I am creating a space where I'm rarely challenged. And if anything, my views could just get increasingly more polarized. And so I find it interesting because I think elections are so specific and we have a real opportunity here to learn from history. As you said, the tropes are similar. It's always around manipulation. It's that the politicians are not trustworthy, that they're involved in some scandals, that the ballot boxes have been ruined, and so on. And so it's really exciting, actually, that we get to do an EU-wide pre-bunking campaign around that too, right? That we knew to some extent these arguments would come up going into the research. But it's really exciting that this time around we can go, hey, you will probably hear something along these lines. You will probably encounter one of these 5 or one of these 3 techniques. And hopefully that will equip individuals with the skills to spot that in a fairly sort of harmless environment exposed through a video, and then sort of apply it when they see it to something that is maybe more inflammatory, maybe more sensationalized, maybe more emotional. But yeah, at its core, I think, I mean, pre-bunking is by no means a silver bullet, and since I've started studying that, I've been saying that we need a multi-layered defense mechanism, we need fact-checking, we like just for even the ethical question around that we have to check falsehoods and correct them, and that there should be a record of what actually occurred in history. But it's really hard to adapt to this battle of misinformation with little old brains like ours.
I think that's the understatement of today, isn't it? It's really hard. I mean, it really is hard, and we all know that in this room. And you're talking about debunking when you're engaging with people who are actively searching stuff out. Sophie, you know, as a journalist, we come across news fatigue all the time. We come across people who are disengaged, who just don't want to know because they're tired. How on earth do you get around that?
I mean, I wish I had the answer. But no, that's not the end. But I really do. No, I would say that the way that we're working within the fact-checking team, and that is becoming sort of integrated with the journalism that we're doing, is we because we're interacting more with the public, because we're looking at things that we find online and we're monitoring online all the time, we're also producing things in different formats that reach different audiences, that we can see reach. I was trying to look to see how young the audiences were. And we're making a lot of YouTube shorts at the moment. They're not all young people who are watching our YouTube shorts, but it's different people, and it's looking at what just observing what the way that people are interacting with each other and with information, and trying to just keep an ear to the ground and respond to that, and keep coming back with the factual information even when you're really depressed. And you know, it can be really hard, particularly fact checking, because fact checkers are targeted so much as well. So they're sort of, you know, I mean, journalists too now. It's just a fact that there is not only the fatigue, but there's also an extra element of challenge when you're going out and working as a journalist, and potentially going to be attacked when you go out in the street. I remember when I started working, I'd go and covering demonstrations, that they weren't the same. It just wasn't the same level of protection you needed as a journalist just to go and talk to someone in the street. So, but I don't think that means that we should give up. I just think that it means that we really have to be way better protected, and it's got to be recognized, and working together with fact checkers. We really do need to collaborate. I mean, that was one of the messages I've heard from here. But I really think that's the only way that we have any chance of moving forward.
You echoed the idea of collaboration, but you also touched upon data. It was something that Paolo was saying earlier on. We need the data in order to continue to monitor what is going on. For Melissa, offer us some hope. Come on, the psychology of hope. Offer us.
Goodness, I don't know if I have hope, but I wanted to jump on that. I cannot even imagine the fatigue and the hard labor of a journalist on fact-checking, so massive respect to that. But I think, generally speaking, across society, and this has sort of come up in our research also, there is a bit of a paralysis caused by the poly crisis, right? So we are in a world where for a considerable long time now, there's been one crisis after another, folding onto the next, without a single moment of a breather. Like if we think about the equivalent maybe after, let's say, not the equivalent, sorry, that's misquoting it, but let's say just after the Second World War, I'm sure we had a moment where we all went, hurrah, the war is over, today we drink, tomorrow we rebuild. And I don't think we've had that moment of respite societally in a long time. We've had COVID, we've had wars, we've had genocide, conflict, and whatnot. We have the crippling existential threat of climate change. And we're just expected to sit here and chat and say, lovely to see you again. And so I think there's actually a societal fatigue around that too. And that is just exacerbated by the constant influx of information that we receive and the news that we receive when we go online. And we have so little time to make sense of it that I wish I was like some of the younger audience members who said, I cross-reference everything and I check, and I'm like, I sometimes don't. Like I will sit here and be like, I don't have the time. I read the first few sentences and go, okay, and go on with my life. And so I think it's important to situate it in the larger zeitgeist of right now, where we are all really exhausted. It is a really difficult time to feel hopeful. It is a real difficult time to keep believing in sort of democratic values when you feel like you protest and do all the things and somehow it is not translating to reality and it's still a grim world. But I think there's also so much to fight for, and I think that this room is testament that we are all trying to figure it out together.
It has been an absolute non-stop news agenda, news cycle that is, I've been working in broadcast and news for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. But Sophie, just let's finish on we're not going to stop though. The news, people still need to know. As journalists, you can't stop.
Yeah, and I think, what gives me, okay, you want something positive, what gives me hope is when I go into journalism schools and I talk to journalists in journalism schools, and sometimes I go in and I think, oh, what am I going to say? And I'm looking back on things and I'm looking at the challenges, but I'm also talking to these journalists who are just so with it and so much more, a lot of them studying data as well, really up on what they should be focusing on. And I think that, it's in the past, there've been so many periods where it has been tough. We have got this information overload, but at the same time, we also have experiences and tools this younger generation that is equipped in the best way possible to keep going.
Keep going. That is a fantastic note on which to end. Sophie Nicholson from AFP, Dr. Melissa Basel from Cambridge University, thank you very, very much. A big round of applause, please. Thank you. And again, a big thank you to the younger guys who have given us hope and optimism. Look, we've been talking about trust, we've been talking about crises, polarization, the media, electoral campaigns. All of this and so much more I discussed with a very special guest that I caught up in London. We talked about this and we even talked about football and, anyway, I won't tell you anymore because we'll play the tape. Many of you will know him as the then UK Prime Minister Tony Blair's chief spokesperson. Many of you will since know him as a strategist, a podcaster, a writer, and a person with a strong opinion. I met up with Alastair Campbell in London, and here's what we discussed. Alastair Campbell, welcome. We're here to focus on the European elections, the upcoming elections. I have your book, straight off the press, and my goodness, it paints a pretty bleak picture when it comes to our political landscape. You're talking about polarization. You are talking about post-truth society and, of course, populism. Is it really that bad, or are you scaremongering?
So you mentioned my 3 Ps. Populism, which I think is a form of politics which isn't about solving problems, it's exploiting problems. polarisation, where politicians try to divide people rather than bring them together, and post-truth, where they have absolutely zero regard for fact and truth. And if you can't have fact and truth as part of the democratic debate, eventually you run out of road in democracy. So I don't think it is scaremongering. I think it's a warning that unless we understand just how dangerous this moment is, then we'll be in trouble.
Let's get on to something a little bit more positive then, because in here you do talk about what potentially can be done. The title of the book, but what can I do? What do you suggest?
Work out who you can trust. I think we're getting more and more funneled into our little tribes. Break out of it. Break out of it. Read books, not newspapers. Listen to stuff that is a bit deeper. Understand complexity. Embrace it. Look, there are some terrible politicians out there, but there's also some very good politicians out there. So actually, give them a bit of respect. You know, they've put their heads above the parapet. They're out there. They get abused the whole time on social media. You know, we've had two of them murdered in our own country in recent times. So give them a bit of respect. Don't just say to yourself, oh, they're all liars.
In the book, you reach out to young people. You want them to get active within politics. We've got an audience who are looking at European parliamentary elections. What more should they be doing, in your opinion, than just voting?
I think if you really care about something, understand that the three most important letters in activism are the first three. Act. Do stuff. Don't just tweet. Don't just sign petitions. Get engaged, get involved. Join organisations. Now, in an election, that might be a party. But if it's a specific issue that you care about that you don't think is being heard enough within the debate, get involved in that. I would say, for example, that within the policy space, I notice with a lot of the organisations I work with that as you get nearer to an election, whether this is businesses or charities, they sort of think, oh, we now have to withdraw from the debate. No, that's the time we need to engage in the debate, try and influence the debate.
You are very active. You've just finished the book. You've got a chart-topping podcast with your co-host, Rory Stewart. He's a former Conservative politician. You're of the centre-left. You're bringing two political divides together. You're crossing this political border. Just explain to us, what is it about your podcast that is so successful?
I think it's that. I think it's the fact that we're two people who are very, very different, who can sit down every week and have a friendly, mutually respectful conversation about really big political issues. And we have this motto, disagree agreeably.
On the podcast, you tackle lots of different issues, especially the impact of technology and artificial intelligence on misinformation. I wonder, what are you looking at and what advice do you give?
Well, I think there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. I think misinformation, we've always had it. You know, people say things that they believe to be true and they turn out not to be true, right? I think disinformation is what I was talking about in relation to stuff that happened during Brexit, stuff that happened in the Trump election, where politicians are saying things which they know to be untrue, where campaigners are saying things which they know to be untrue, where films and audio are being generated which are fake. And I think it's a real problem. I think the most important thing is awareness. I know you've had a panel today about media literacy. I think more countries should follow what's happening in Finland, where they're being schooled in how to spot fake news, how to check out sources, how to sort of, in a way, become their own explorers of fact, critical thinking. And I think that in a perfect world, you'd have politicians on all sides who would challenge this stuff. But actually, we have too many who want to exploit it. And I think that the dangers of AI, look, there are huge opportunities from AI, huge. But I think in the political space, particularly in this year where more people are voting than ever before, I think the dangers are quite profound of fake video, fake news, fake audio.
In that case, how do you rebuild trust within politics, within the media, or is it just simply too late?
I don't think we should say there is no trust in politics. When we go into these European elections, well, sadly we won't, but when people go into these European elections, millions of people will engage with thousands of politicians, and there is a relationship of trust there. Where I think that we have to worry about where trust has gone is in, first of all, in this growing sense amongst some people that there's no point even listening because they don't care about me, or they can't make change anyway. They can make change, and they do care about you, so you have to kind of overcome that. And then the other place where trust goes is when politicians make huge promises which then don't get fulfilled. And of course, this is where the politicians have to do a better job of educating people to the realities of what politics is.
So on that note, I've got a really great question from one of our audience members, and it's how should they be dealing with the, they say, nonsense that they're going to hear from EU politicians in these upcoming EU elections?
So I think the institutions have to do a much, much, much better job of standing up for themselves, explaining the reality of what they do, and admitting that it can be messy, it can be difficult, it can be a bit grungy. You have to do deals with people you don't like very much. And I think that the other thing is, going back to the three Ps, we have to call out the populism more. Populism is about exploiting your fears and concerns and exploiting problems, not addressing them. I can't think of a single populist politician who has actually made life better for anybody who's ever elected them. Brexit's a classic example. The populists won the Brexit debate. Has that made life better for British people? I don't think it has.
One of the chapters in your book is titled The Slow Death of Democracy. So just tell us, how do we revive democracy given that there is a mistrust in those people who embody democracy?
That title came from a speech that was made by John Major, who was a Conservative Prime Minister in the UK, and he was making the point that if we allow the chipping away at democratic institutions, that we shouldn't be surprised that if eventually they erode. Now, how do you protect that? You understand the nature of the threat so that you can actually seek to address it. You do start to do better political education. You do start to do what, as I say, the Finns have done in relation to things like media literacy. But it's basically a warning that unless we understand the threat to our democratic institutions, they're not there by divine right.
Alastair Campbell, thank you.
Thank you.
A fascinating conversation. We spoke for 40 minutes, actually. The team have done an amazing job by bringing that down. The full video will be online. But it's that idea of just not tweeting. Don't just look at from the backgrounds. Get involved. Do stuff that really carries. And it's completely through his book as well. He's very, very strong opinions on that. Get active. Alastair Campbell there. One organisation that is really encouraging people to get active is our next speaker. He's thinking of really creative ways of engaging people to get active. Join me in welcoming the co-president of Avote, which is a French NGO, Dorian Drill, who'll be joining us now. Dorian.
Hi, everyone. I'm very impressed and very happy to be there. My name is Dorian Dreuil, and I'm political analyst and head of some non-profit organizations involved in democratic processes. So I'm very happy to be there and to share with you the story of a French organization that helps people young people to vote. As I said, I'm French, but you already know because you heard my accent. So if you don't understand something I said, just please don't tell me before the end of the day. There is something we see in France, and I think it's interesting to share with you because it could be a general trend through our ages democracies. Younger people continue to get involved and mobilize. Even, it's not secret, they vote less and less election after elections. That's why we created Avote 3 years ago, an NGO independent of political parties and institutions that run campaigns to make democracy more festive and joyful. During a period, and we heard a lot of things today, that it's not very often to talk about democracy with fun and with joy. Avote, in French, it means I voted. And it's a phrase used in the polling station that we pronounce when somebody has just voted. So as you may imagine, we can hear more and more today during the election times. But it seems to us to be a powerful name when you came to defending electoral participation. As we are today talking about disinformation, for me it reminds me that there may be 2 points of reflections about democracy. Is that democracy today faces a double challenge. First, protecting electoral processes. We many talk about today, from destabilization through disinformation from outside the electoral process, but also sometimes from inside the process. And the second is bringing information as close as possible to citizens to be sure that they can vote. Because even if you have the right to vote, maybe you just can't go vote. So Avote take care of the second point, which is already a lot of stuff. And when we are thinking about getting young people to vote, for us, it's like a big question is how to make democracy fun and make voting a celebration again. I'm going to talk about 3 types of action we run. First is that we bring democracy back where it's not expected. Second, we create original technology solutions in partnership with companies. And third, we advocate for changing the rules of the democratic game. So first challenge is to bring democracy back where the people are. Because especially young people are already getting involved and informating themselves in a different way that we used to know. And most often, it's outside the usual and institutional settings. So if we want to talk to them, if we want to talk to young people, we must not change words or speak differently. But we need to bring democracy back and bring the discussion back to the place they used to use. I have 3 examples to share with you. First, we think at Avote that having a party and discussing politics is possible. We are proving out in the field that it works. We bring democracy to unexpected places like music festivals or theater or cultural places to inform people about the date of the next election or explain how political institution works. And in these places, we never say that not voting is wrong. We never say that. We provide information on the electoral process. We explain how to vote and why it's important, but never that. We never say to young people that you need to vote, and if you don't go to vote, you will be a bad citizen. Second thing is that if voters don't come to democracy, we will bring democracy to them. And then we organize door-to-door operations to discuss about elections directly at home. And sometimes in front of the door, but most often time, people that just ask to us to get inside and take a coffee and continue to talk about the processes. Third thing is that when we created Avote, we met some communications advisor, like professionals of how to make a campaign, and they said to us, oh, you want to make people, young people vote, you have to use social media. That was a big surprise for us, and we were lucky it was a free advice, but because we were, okay, we already know it, but we think that we have to go to do more and not just make campaign on social media, but bring the social media platforms to co-create the campaign with us. So with Meta, we have worked to create the first chatbot on WhatsApp about voting process in France. And then you can have a conversation with AI conversation on chatbot, and it will help you to get right register and to give you all the information you need to get to vote. We also work with Tinder, and during the last campaign in France, Tinder's user receive a simple message. We talk to them like, if you want a date near to your house, near to your door, maybe you want to vote next to your house, so be sure that you register on the right polling station. That's kind of example of kind of campaign we made, and all these campaigns have in common that we always run them in partnership with companies or institutions. And for us, it's essential because it's an opportunity for us, but also for our partners. And that's finally something I want to share with you, is that non-profit organizations are essential to companies and institutions when you talk about democracy and vote. There is no institution or company's campaign about democracy will work without an association. I'm not saying that NGOs do it better or that we are smarter, but sometimes. But that kind of organization, I think, are the last one people trust. Young people trust is collapsing in all the other form of kind of information or company or institution. So we have an essential role of independent, non-partisan and non-profit organization, is that to build bridge between the multi-stakeholder and act as a, I said, trust third party. So maybe you're probably wondering if creating an open and inclusive democracy by running joyful campaign, does it work? Yes. If it doesn't, they didn't invite me today. Some numbers. In 2022, during the presidential French campaign, 400,000 people use our tool to get right register on the electoral list. We have reached more than 12 million people on social media, and more 200 news media in France and the world around have reported our action and operation. We did this with less than 5,000 euros, 20 volunteers, and no employee. Only with the thing that we were sure is that joy and fun is powerful, and democratic innovation works. And something that we are sure is that institutions, companies, or civil society don't have choice. We must cooperate and defend democracy together. That's the only way to put some trust in the next campaign and electoral campaign. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope to see you again and to make a democracy a joy again and a good way together. Thank you very much.
Dorian, Joy, thank you very much. And yes, let's hope democracy will be a joy. Impressive figures. Thank you very much for sharing them and the creative ways that you are getting to those young people. Dorian touched upon trust. We have been listening and we've been hearing throughout the day the importance of fact checkers, especially ahead of the elections coming up. Fact-checking organizations are critical. We know that. And now a new coalition has been created. And to tell us a little bit more about that, we're joined by our next guest, Stefan Munches, the coordinator at the European Fact-Checking Standards Network, and also Blanca Zoldi, editor-in-chief at the website lacmush.hu. Please join me on stage. Thank you.
So hello, my name is Blanca Zöldi. I'm the editor-in-chief of LACMUS, fact-checking website in Hungary.
And I'm Stefan Münkes. I'm the coordinator of the EFCSN, you can say European Fact-Checking Standards Network. In our experience, that doesn't roll off the tongue as easy, so just call it EFCSN and everybody knows very soon what's meant by this. So what we want to present to you today is a project we call Elections 24 Check. Because misinformation doesn't stop at borders. That's why we created this project with our partners and with the support of Google. We have built a fact-checking database focused on the 2024 EU elections. In it, we collect, analyze, and make accessible a broad range of fact checks, of debunks, of pre-bunks, reports. And content in the database covers claims and issues about the elections, about different national election campaigns, but also about political and policy issues directly or indirectly related to the EU. And this is basically a collaborative effort. We have over 40 fact-checking organizations that are participating and that have already started ingesting data in the database. They have started over a month ago, so there are already more than 500 fact checks in the database and more get ingested every day. Participating fact-checking organizations cover more than 30 countries, so it's not just the EU we're covering the wider European neighborhood as well, because false claims and disinformation narratives, turns out, don't stop at national borders. The database enables transnational collaborations of European fact-checkers. Blanca will talk a little bit more about this later on. And the database strengthens knowledge sharing between the fact-checking community and researchers and policymakers. So we've built a back office to the database, which offers some nice analysis and analytics tools. And the project enhances and enables public access to verified information for European citizens. And this is where you get this under elections24.efcsn.com. You can find all fact checks and articles that are part of the database with a headline translated into English. So all the different languages we cover, they are all translated automatically. All content is, of course, searchable and filterable. So if you want to find political fact checks, for example, from across Europe about a topic such as migration, elections24.efcsn.com is the place where you can find them. Blanca,
Well,
over to you.
Yes, now, thanks to Stefan, you have all seen what everybody sees from the website, but now I will take you behind the scenes and show you what fact-checkers see from the back end. And for this, I have brought you a specific example, which will show that anytime when a fact-checker comes across a suspicious piece of information, thanks to this database, we are able to check this information and see whether this has been checked by other fact-checkers as well. So imagine together that we're sitting, or I'm sitting in Budapest in the fact-checking office of Lakmus, and we come across a picture of the Eiffel Tower basically covered in haystacks or covered in flames. I don't know if any of you have seen this very interesting picture. The Hungarian caption was saying that this was done by French protesters, French farmers protesters. It's like, okay, how do I check whether this has circulated anywhere in Europe? For example, I use the search bar of the backend, and because actually the database has an inbuilt translation mode, I can even use my beautiful Hungarian language and type in gazdatüntetések instead of the farmers' protest in French. And we can already see that, for example, AFP and Visinomer from Macedonia already checked this suspicious photograph. And if we go to actually to see the details of the fact checks, we can already see all the metadata that was ingested by the fact checkers earlier. So we see the source of the claim, the date of the claim. We also see all the multimedia uploaded to the fact check, for example, video or a photograph. In this case, for example, I can even search for the photograph itself of the Eiffel Tower that was suspicious in the first place. And this is made possible because of the new Google search function, photo function, through an API. So that's actually a great help for fact checkers because we can even filter for all this metadata behind it. So just to put it together, in the everyday life of a fact checker, what does this database bring? Well, first, it brings a little bit of extra work, because as we publish fact checks of local knowledge that we have already done in our languages, we need to upload it to this website and fill in all the metadata. But this 5-10 minutes of extra work for each article, actually it's very much worth it, because at the end, we are not the only ones doing it, but as Stefan mentioned, like 30 plus partners within the EFCSN. So we are uniting all this local knowledge into this vast database of fact checks. And with the help of this, we are actually able to, well, unite our efforts, avoid duplication of work, and work, well, basically search and work more efficiently in the end. And also to look for international narratives and foster research. And this is where I will actually pass to Stefan.
Yeah, so as you might imagine, there is a trove of data that we will or are already making accessible to researchers and policymakers and stakeholders. So we will provide you, or we can provide you with access to the back office of the Elections 24 check database. This access allows you to use our statistical analysis tools, download metadata, you'll be able to see what keywords are trending, and you will be able to see on which platforms misinformation is circulating, and you'll have access to our AI-powered narratives tools. So this sounds quite fancy, and I think it actually is. So this is how it looks. It doesn't look very fancy, but it works very well. So what it does, every day, all claims in the database are analyzed and clustered into narratives automatically. So the back office lets you explore narratives, for example, by topic, and if we can see in this video in a second, also by automatically constructed claim clusters. So you can scroll through currently prevalent narratives, and when you click on one, for example, about the farmers' protest, the tool lists all the relevant claims listed under these narratives for you. And thereby the database gives all stakeholders a daily updated comprehensive overview of misinformation circulating in Europe. So this is just a small glimpse into our project. If you want to learn more, if you want to get researcher access, please reach out, and thank you for your time.
Blanca and Stephen, thank you so much for sharing those details, that initiative, critical work of the fact-checking community, and really pretty impressive tools there to enable them to do so. Thank you so much, a comprehensive explanation there. And let's face it, when it comes to facts, when it comes to accuracy, when it comes to tackling deliberate misinformation, it's never more critical to be accurate and to get things right than at a time of war. For over 2 years now, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we have been watching, we've been monitoring, we've been witnessing how Ukraine has been battling on 2 fronts. Of course, on the battlefield itself, but also in the fight against misinformation. With her first-hand experience of this very war, of these 2 battlefields, of this ongoing nightmare, we're joined by Lyubov Tsibulska. She is the first head at the Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security under the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture and Information Policy. Welcome.
Hi all. It's my great pleasure to be here. It's my honor, in fact, and I'm very grateful to the organizers for this event, but also to all of you for your solid intention to fight disinformation during elections. I am Lyubov Tsibulska, and I'm a hybrid warfare expert with the main focus on disinformation. I've been working with the civil society, within governmental sector, including Ukrainian armed forces. I came from a country which is very often called a testing ground for Russian disinformation campaigns, and it's like it's also called not just a ground for disinformation campaign, but this year it's called country where it's impossible to conduct elections. We cannot do it. We cannot do it because we cannot ensure safety of our people. Because 2 years ago, Russia unleashed this brutal war against us. And we just can't provide safety at the polling stations. And our latest elections, before a full-scale invasion, was recognized as the most democratic and most transparent in Ukraine's modern history. And it was not a given. It was a merit, largely, of civil society and government institutions which put a lot of efforts to achieve this. So we cannot provide safety. And even today, my morning started with news that Kyiv, the city where I came from, the city where I live, was under heavy missiles attack. 31 missiles, including hypersonic missile and air ballistic missiles, were launched on sleeping people early in the morning. And I must say that I felt that it's much difficult and scarier to be outside of Ukraine when your child is there and something like this happens. Also, since many people are fighting on the battlefield and many people left the country, we cannot conduct elections because we cannot ensure representation for these elections. So I'm making this long introduction to say that elections, free, transparent, fair elections is a luxury. And now we value this even more than ever before. Elections are meant to be a manifestation of democracy. But at the same time, with participation of disinformation and propaganda, it might lead the way to authoritarianism or even totalitarianism. Look at today's Russia. They just had elections a few days ago. And now one of the bloodiest dictators of the 21st century is being re-elected again. And in Russia, elections is not a tool for people to make a choice. It's a tool for a dictator to once again claim so-called legitimacy. For the past 10 years, Russia has been actively shaking up us from inside and polarizing our society, sowing distrust in institutions. And what Russia tested in Ukraine later became its playbook for disruption in other countries. Disinformation paves the way for disunity, paves the way for war. And Russia poured huge resources into preparation for a full-scale war. The Kremlin counted on its success of its propaganda in Ukraine. They had hoped that their soldiers would be greeted with flowers in Ukraine, and that Ukraine will sacrifice its statehood. But it never happened. So why? It never happened because we were awake since 2014. We've been analyzing Russian disinformation techniques, and we've been countering their propaganda on different levels. When they attacked us, when they invaded us in 2022, we acted as one front, both government and civil society and media. But it was like this, not always, obviously. And I think that the most dangerous thing is when society and government is in this dormant state, where they don't pay attention and they do not look where the threat might come from. And we had such mistakes in our history. In 2014, when Russia occupied Crimea, holding this fake stage referendum, many people were inclined to believe that this is the will of Crimea's citizens, that this is what they want, to be part of Russia. However, only later did it become known that a few months before, the Russian security services, Russian FSB, had launched 4 large groups in the main social media. Vkontakte, you might know that this is Russian social media, and Odnoklassniki, but also Facebook, to spread hatred towards Ukraine, towards EU, promote anti-West narratives and pro-Russian narratives. At that time, social media companies did not pay attention to coordinated inauthentic activity that much. And so in this way, Russia prepared Crimean residents for the referendum. At that time, we didn't understand how it was possible that the whole part of our territory, the whole part of our country suddenly is passing to the hands of our neighbor, to another country. In fact, this was preceded by a large-scale, very carefully thought-out information campaign. And we missed it because we were asleep. We didn't pay attention. Elections are one of the tools for expressing people's will, and human will and public human opinion can always be manipulated. And this is something that the Russian propaganda machine has mastered very well. Among the main techniques of the Russian disinformation machine in Ukraine now, from which the governments of other authoritarian states take example quite often, I would single out a few of them. First of all, polarization of the society regarding hot, sensitive topics due to simultaneous support of two conflicting narratives through social media. It breeds hatred, fatigue, despair, and that's what they need. They want to decrease our mobilization campaign, they want to decrease our desire and will to fight, and they want to deprive us of your support. Then active involvement of local actors in the information sphere. Influencers, bloggers, politicians, those who promote Russian narratives. And this is something that I think is very seriously underestimated in your countries. Yes, there are many useful idiots who spread these false narratives voluntarily, but at the same time, as a person who've been studying Russian secret services for a long time, I may say that that's how they work. They have a lot of people on the ground in other countries. Most of the time, if it looks like a duck and swims like a duck and quacks like a duck, then there is high probability it's a duck. So we have to identify these people and analyze, and first of all, analyze the source of financing. Also, in Ukraine, we observe creation, of course, of pages, of clones of official sources of information, mainly state institutions. Then disinformation through advertising and social media, use of artificial intelligence, and we talked a lot about this, so I will not dwell on this. And one of the most dangerous campaigns, what I see right now, is targeted psyops on certain social groups through messengers. In Ukraine, the most popular messengers are Viber and Telegram. I know that they're not popular here, but Telegram, according to the latest polling, is the main source of information in Ukraine, which is bizarre because Telegram is not media, so people basically confuse it with media. And the problem with Telegram is that they do not respond to our authorities. We were trying to ask them for some cooperation, for some regulation, but they don't have community standards, they don't have any rules. These channels where people can just subscribe, they are completely anonymous, so basically they can be run from anywhere, and they usually, very often they run from Russia. And all these disinformation campaigns, they have very physical, very material, real consequences. And one of the latest examples, one of my favorite, comes from the last year when Russia was bombing our critical infrastructure heavily. And people didn't have electricity and heat in their homes. So people, quite often in some regions, they were added forcefully to some Viber chats and Telegram channels. And then they were getting messages that Ukraine was the one to blame. And suddenly, in some regions like Odessa, people went to the streets and started protesting against local authorities, demanding to switch on electricity, which was physically impossible because we needed some time to restore these electricity stations. And there are many examples like this. So obviously, election manipulations also have very serious physical consequences. And our task as professionals, as experts, is to protect our citizens from malign influence. And sometimes, like now, it might seem like information threat. But if we fail, then this threat is very physical, is very real. But I don't want to speak only some dark scenarios today. And about threats, I'd like to share some success stories, some of strategic communication victories of Ukraine. And one of them, fortunately, belongs to my team. So I'd like to show a few videos to you. So the idea came 2 years ago when the war started. We realized that we have to maintain the interest towards our country, the interest and attention of our Western allies. So we designed this project and we suggested this project to our government institutions. At that moment, it was the Ministry of Defense, and now it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then they happily agreed to take it. So we produce videos where we advocate for more support, where we say thank you to other countries, and where we troll Russians. And these videos, they are designed to show that we are actually much closer to our Western allies than might think, that we share the same cultural code, we are raising on the same music, literature, art. So I'd like to show you a couple of them. So let's start with the first one.
Slava Ukrainie! Героям слава! Yeah!
Yes, this is what we do, and I see that YouTube representatives are watching it very carefully, checking do we have rights for this music? For this particular we do, but yeah. So we started working with MOD, and they had 600,000 followers, and when in 1 year we've been giving them a lot of videos, and then in 1 year they had 2 million followers. And now look at the other one, the one that was so well covered in France that even fashion magazines posted it. Thank you so much. So this was not just a way to show off. It's also my way to say thank you, because you give a lot of support, your governments, your societies, to Ukraine. And thanks to this support, my daughter today was protected by our defense systems. So yeah, I don't want to be the only obstacles between you and informal part of the event. So thank you so much.
Lyubov Cybulska, dziękuję. It's a testament to the Ukrainian spirit when they can still, given what is going on, produce videos like that. And yes, I think rights are accounted for there, David. It's incredible that they use such strong humor in order to get their message across. But it's also a stark reminder of the situation on the ground, and we hope your daughter is okay, and thank you for reminding us what is happening day to day, because we touched upon news fatigue and disengagement, and the reality is very different to so many people in various different places. So today, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention. Are there challenges? Hell yeah. There is a lot of work for all of us to do. There are a lot of obstacles, but there are a lot of toolkits that we've been seeing today throughout the day, whether it's Google or whether it's the fact-checking initiatives. There are lots of ways in order to combat misinformation. There's a huge election coming up. Have I mentioned that yet? In June, up to 400 million people are going to be voting across the EU. There's a lot of work to do, but you have the tools and you have the necessary resources. And I know that you're incredibly engaged. I want ideas from you. You've got the red cards, the blue cards, the yellow cards. I hope you're going to carry on writing your reflections and getting those thoughts so that you can feed them back. Organisers will be collecting them. They will be checking their homework. So please do take them in, and please keep this conversation going afterwards at drinks. For you online, thank you very much for joining us today at the Fighting Misinformation Online conference that we have held today. Thank you. And for the rest of you, let's keep the conversation going outside. Thank you so much. Thank you.